The cabin lights flickered as Flight 227 shuddered through the turbulence somewhere over the dark Atlantic. In Seat 8A, a man who looked like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders was about to become the only thing standing between 300 souls and certain death. What nobody knew, what nobody could have possibly known, was that the exhausted father sleeping against the window had once done the impossible in cockpits where hesitation meant death. But that was a lifetime ago, buried under promises and sacrifice. Tonight, the past was about to demand one final flight. If you want to know whether Daniel Harper kept the promise he made to his daughter, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Daniel Harper's eyes were closed, but he wasn't really sleeping. He'd learned years ago how to exist in that strange space between consciousness and rest. A soldier's sleep, they called it in the service. Alert enough to respond to danger, relaxed enough to call it rest. On a transatlantic red-eye, it was the best he could manage. The cabin around him hummed with that particular white noise of long-distance flight. Engines thrumming, air circulation systems whispering, the occasional cough or shifting passenger breaking the rhythm. In Seat 8A, pressed against the cold oval window, Daniel existed in his own private darkness. His daughter's face floated behind his eyelids. Emma, 7 years old, gap-toothed smile, dark curls that never stayed in the ponytails he attempted each morning. She'd be asleep now too, 3,000 miles away in his sister's spare bedroom, probably clutching that worn stuffed rabbit she refused to outgrow. "Just 4 more flights," he'd told her before leaving. 4 more trips and Daddy's done traveling for a while. She'd nodded solemnly, like she understood the weight of those words. Maybe she did. Kids understood more than adults gave them credit for. The flight attendant passed by his row for the 3rd time, her cart rattling softly. Daniel kept his eyes closed. He'd already declined the sad excuse for dinner they'd offered an hour into the flight. His stomach was too tight for food, had been for the entire week he'd spent in Frankfurt negotiating contracts for the engineering firm that employed him. Not exciting work, not dangerous work, but steady work. The kind of work that paid for Emma's school supplies and her dance lessons and the modest apartment they shared. Safe work. That's what mattered now. The man in Seat 8B, a businessman who'd introduced himself as Gerald something or other during boarding, was snoring softly, his laptop still open on the tray table, spreadsheet glowing dimly. In 8C, a young woman had her headphones in, eyes closed, head bobbing slightly to whatever music filled her ears. Perfect strangers sitting shoulder to shoulder for 7 hours, sharing space and air and nothing else. Daniel had always found something deeply isolating about air travel. 300 people packed into a metal tube hurtling through the darkness at 500 miles per hour, and yet each person remained utterly alone, wrapped in their own thoughts, their own lives, their own destinations. The turbulence hit without warning. The aircraft dropped, that stomach-in-your-throat sensation that made gasps ripple through the cabin. The seatbelt light dinged on, accompanied by the captain's voice, American accent, calm and professional. "Folks, we've hit a rough patch here. Please return to your seats and keep those seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, please be seated." Daniel's eyes opened. Not quickly, not with alarm, just the natural response to a change in conditions. Through the window, he could see nothing but darkness. No moon tonight, no stars visible through the cloud cover. The wing light blinked its steady rhythm, red against black. The turbulence continued, the aircraft bucking and shuddering. Not severe, Daniel assessed automatically. Uncomfortable, but not dangerous. The kind of rough air that made nervous flyers grip their armrests, but didn't concern anyone who understood the engineering tolerances of modern aircraft. He'd experienced real turbulence before, the kind that made you question physics and prayer in equal measure. This wasn't that, but something felt wrong. Daniel couldn't articulate it, couldn't point to a specific detail that triggered the instinct. But 20 years of flying, 8 in fighter jets, another 12 in various aircraft before he'd walked away from it all, had built intuition he couldn't simply discard. Something in the way the aircraft was moving through the air, some subtle wrongness in the vibration pattern beneath his feet. He straightened in his seat, fully awake now. The flight attendants had strapped into their jump seats, faces professionally neutral. Most passengers had settled back into their books, screens, or attempts at sleep. The turbulence smoothed out, the ride gentling into that steady cruise feel. But the wrongness persisted. Daniel's hand moved to his armrest, fingers drumming a pattern he didn't consciously choose. An old habit, one Emma had asked him about once. "Why do you do that, Daddy? With your fingers?" "Just thinking, sweetheart. Just thinking." What he hadn't told her was that it was a pre-flight check pattern, the rhythm of switches and controls, muscle memory from cockpits he'd sworn never to sit in again. 10 minutes passed. 15. The cabin relaxed further. Gerald in 8B's snoring resumed. The young woman in 8C shifted, adjusting her headphones. Then the intercom crackled again. The voice that came through wasn't the calm, professional tone from before. It was tight, controlled, but Daniel heard the tension underneath, the specific sound of someone working very hard to maintain composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Mitchell. I need everyone to listen carefully and remain calm. We're experiencing some technical difficulties with our flight controls. Nothing to be overly concerned about at this moment, but I need to ask..." A pause, barely a beat, but loaded with significance. "Is there anyone on board with extensive flight experience? Military pilots, commercial pilots, anyone with significant cockpit time? If so, please make yourself known to the flight attendants immediately." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Not panic, not yet, but that sharp collective intake of breath that precedes it. Heads turned, passengers looked at each other, searching for reassurance or answers in the faces of strangers. Daniel's fingers stopped drumming, his chest tightened, a physical weight settling over his ribs like someone had laid sandbags across his sternum. The world narrowed to a single point of focus, that intercom speaker above his head, still crackling with static. No. The word formed in his mind with perfect clarity, absolute certainty. No. He'd made a promise. The night Emma was born, screaming and red-faced in that delivery room while her mother, Sarah, who'd been gone 3 years now, cancer, too fast, too cruel, had looked at him with exhausted eyes and made him swear. "No more flying combat missions," Sarah had whispered, gripping his hand with surprising strength for someone who'd just endured 18 hours of labor. "No more deployments to places whose names you can't tell me. No more nights wondering if you're coming home. Promise me, Daniel. For her. For us." He'd promised. And when the cancer came, when Sarah had fought with everything she had and lost anyway, he'd whispered that promise again over her hospital bed. "I'm out," he'd told her. "Consulting work only. Desk jobs. Safe jobs. I'll be there for Emma. Every morning. Every night. I promise." Sarah had squeezed his hand one last time. He'd kept that promise for 4 years. 4 years of steady paychecks and predictable schedules, and being present for every parent-teacher conference, every dance recital, every scraped knee and bad dream. 4 years of being exactly what Emma needed, available, alive, safe. The murmurs in the cabin were growing louder. A flight attendant, young, blonde, name tag reading Ashley, was moving through the aisles, asking passengers directly, her voice careful but urgent. "Excuse me, sir, any flight experience? Ma'am, have you ever piloted an aircraft?" Daniel sank lower in his seat. Someone else would respond. Had to. On a flight this size, there had to be at least one pilot, one person who could help without breaking a promise to a dead wife and a sleeping daughter. The aircraft shuddered again, more pronounced this time. Not turbulence. Something else. Daniel's trained instincts cataloged the sensation automatically. Asymmetric thrust, possible hydraulic issue, something affecting the control surfaces. His fingers resumed their drumming pattern, faster now. "Excuse me." The voice came from 2 rows back. Daniel turned slightly, enough to see a man in his 60s standing in the aisle, military bearing unmistakable even in civilian clothes. Squared shoulders, direct gaze, that particular way of holding oneself that never entirely faded. "I flew helicopters," the man said to Ashley. "Army, 40 years ago. I don't know if that's what you need, but..." "Thank you, sir." Ashley's relief was palpable. "Please come with me." The older man moved forward. As he passed Daniel's row, their eyes met for just a moment. Recognition flickered, not of each other specifically, but of kind. The older man's gaze lingered, something questioning in his expression, before he continued toward the front of the cabin. Daniel closed his eyes again. Not your problem. Someone's handling it. You made a promise. But his hands were shaking now, imperceptibly to anyone watching, but he felt it. The tremor of adrenaline, of instinct demanding action, of training that couldn't be erased even when you desperately wanted to forget. 5 minutes crawled by. The cabin had gone quiet, that particular silence of collective anxiety. People weren't reading anymore, weren't watching their screens. They were waiting, listening for the next announcement, the next clue about whether they should be worried. The intercom crackled. Folks, Captain Mitchell again. We're working through some challenges up here, but everything's under control. We may need to make an unscheduled landing, so we're coordinating with air traffic control to find the nearest suitable airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll keep you updated. The calm professional voice was back, but Daniel heard what others wouldn't. The subtext, the things not being said. Making an unscheduled landing in the middle of the Atlantic wasn't simple. It meant something had gone from technical difficulty to serious problem. It meant they were in trouble, the kind of trouble that required immediate action. It meant the helicopter pilot they'd found probably wasn't enough. Gerald in 8B had woken up. "What's happening?" he asked, looking around with bleary confusion. "Are we landing?" "Technical issues," the young woman in 8C said, pulling out one earbud. Her face had gone pale. "They asked for pilots." "Oh." Gerald's eyes widened. "Oh, is that bad?" "I'm sure it's just a precaution," Daniel heard himself say, his voice steady even as his pulse hammered. "They're being thorough." The lie tasted bitter. Another flight attendant appeared at the front of the cabin, older, authoritative, probably the senior crew member. She moved down the aisle with purpose, scanning faces, looking for something. She stopped at row 8. "Sir?" She was looking directly at Daniel. "I'm sorry to bother you, but you've been sitting very still since the captain's announcement, and you're—" She paused, studying him. "You have the look of someone who's done this before. Have you ever flown?" Every eye in the surrounding rows turned toward him. Daniel's throat went dry. "I used to," he admitted quietly. "A long time ago." "What kind of aircraft?" The question hung in the air. Daniel could lie, should lie, but something about the woman's eyes, brown, direct, worried but trying to hide it, made the lie impossible. "FA-18 Hornets," he said. "Navy." The change in her expression was immediate. "How long ago?" 12 years since I flew combat. I've done some consulting work since, flight testing, evaluation, but nothing operational." "How many hours total?" "Around 6,000. She didn't hesitate. "I need you to come with me. Please." "I can't." The words came out harder than he intended. "I have a daughter. I promised her." "Sir." The flight attendant's voice dropped lower, meant only for him. "The helicopter pilot we found is trying, but he's not current, and this aircraft is nothing like what he flew. The captain is having some kind of medical episode. The first officer is 26 years old with less than 1,000 hours. She's good, but she's terrified, and we're losing hydraulic systems faster than she can compensate for." Daniel's stomach dropped. "How many systems?" "I don't know the technical details, but the captain managed to tell us before he couldn't anymore, that we need someone who understands emergency procedures for complete hydraulic failure." The cabin seemed to tilt, though the aircraft flew steady. Complete hydraulic failure. Jesus. That was the nightmare scenario, the one pilots trained for but prayed never to experience. No hydraulics meant no normal flight controls, no way to steer the aircraft through conventional means. No brakes, nothing. "There are 318 people on this plane," the flight attendant continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. 16 children, 5 infants. "I don't know what promise you made or why you made it, but right now we need you. They need you." Daniel looked past her, down the length of the cabin. Rows and rows of people. A mother holding a sleeping baby. Teenagers with headphones still on, oblivious. Business travelers and vacationers and people heading home or leaving home or searching for something they couldn't name. 318 lives. And somewhere in New York, a 7-year-old girl with dark curls and a gap-toothed smile. sleeping peacefully because she trusted her father to come home. "I need to make a call first," Daniel said. "Sir, we can't delay 30 seconds." He pulled out his phone, hands shaking now, visible. "Please." The flight attendant hesitated, then nodded. "Make it quick." Daniel's fingers fumbled with the phone. International calling, his sister's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Her voicemail picked up. Of course, it was the middle of the night in New York. "Jess, it's me." His voice cracked. "Listen, I need you to tell Emma something just tell her that Daddy loves her more than anything in the world. Tell her that everything I do, everything I've ever done, is to keep my promises to her. Tell her—" He stopped, fighting for control. "Tell her I'm sorry if I scared her, but I had to help some people. And I'll see her soon, I promise." He ended the call before his voice could break completely. The flight attendant was waiting. Daniel unbuckled his seatbelt and stood on legs that felt like water. Every instinct screamed at him to sit back down, to let someone else handle this, to keep the promise he'd made to Sarah and Emma. But Sarah was gone, and Emma would understand. Someday, when she was older, when she had children of her own, she'd understand that some promises couldn't be kept without breaking others. That being a good father sometimes meant being more than just present. It meant being willing to do the impossible when the impossible was required. "Take me to the cockpit," he said. The walk forward felt like moving through water. Passengers watched him pass, some with hope, others with fear, all with that desperate need for someone to fix the unfixable. The helicopter pilot stood near the galley, and as Daniel approached, recognition flared in the older man's eyes again. "I saw it in you," the man said quietly. "Back there. Knew you were trying to hide." "I made a promise," Daniel said. "Yeah." The man's expression softened. "We all did. But right now, son, these people need you more than anyone else in the world." The cockpit door opened. Daniel had been in hundreds of cockpits, but the sight still struck him. The instrument panels, the overhead switches, the windscreen showing nothing but darkness ahead. The first officer sat in the left seat, her hands moving with controlled precision across the controls, but her face was sheet white, sweat beading at her temples. And in the right seat, slumped over the control yoke, was the captain. Unconscious or worse, Daniel couldn't tell from the doorway. The senior flight attendant, her name tag read Margaret, moved quickly to check on the captain while another crew member helped secure him away from the controls. The first officer glanced back, and Daniel saw the naked terror in her eyes before she forced it down, forced herself to focus on the instruments. "Are you the pilot they found?" she asked, voice tight. "Yes." "What did you fly?" "FA-18s, Navy carrier operations." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite relief, but a slight easing of the terror. "I'm Sarah Chen, first officer. I've got about 900 hours total, most of it on this aircraft type. Captain Mitchell has had some kind of stroke or cardiac event, we're not sure. He was able to get a message out before he lost consciousness. We're losing hydraulic pressure in all 3 systems. I've been trying to maintain altitude and heading, but the controls are getting progressively heavier and less responsive." Daniel moved closer, his eyes scanning the instrument panels. Years of training kicked in automatically, reading the displays, assessing the situation. Hydraulic quantity gauges showing red, warning lights illuminating like a Christmas tree. Altitude holding at 37,000 feet, but the artificial horizon showed the aircraft fighting for level flight. "When did the hydraulics start failing?" he asked. "About 15 minutes ago. Started with System A, then B, now C is dropping fast. I've been trying to compensate with differential thrust, but—" "You're doing exactly right," Daniel interrupted. "Keep doing exactly what you're doing." He slid into the right seat, the captain's seat, still warm from the other man's body. His hands found the controls without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over. The yoke felt wrong immediately. Too heavy, sluggish, the feedback all wrong. "Talk me through what happened before the hydraulics failed," Daniel said, his hands exploring the controls, testing response. "Any unusual vibrations? Strange handling characteristics?" "There was turbulence about 20 minutes before the hydraulic warning started. Pretty standard stuff, nothing severe. But right after, Captain Mitchell mentioned the controls felt a little stiff. We were checking through the emergency procedures when he grabbed his chest and just collapsed. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities. Turbulence causing structural damage was unlikely, but not impossible. Could have fractured hydraulic lines, damaged pumps, any number of failure points. What's our fuel state? We were at the halfway point when this started. Now we're about 40%, maybe 5 hours at current consumption if we maintain altitude and speed. 5 hours. But without hydraulics, maintaining altitude and speed would become increasingly difficult, and landing would be nearly impossible. Nearest airport? Daniel asked. Shannon, Ireland. About 90 minutes at current speed. ATC is clearing us priority landing. Emergency services will be standing by. 90 minutes. Daniel's hands moved across the control panels, checking systems, running through procedures he'd practiced countless times in simulators. Every aircraft was different, but the principles remained the same. Physics didn't change. The fundamental challenge of keeping a massive metal tube in the air came down to thrust, lift, and control. Without hydraulics, they had thrust. The engines were still running perfectly. They had lift. The wing still generated it, but control was disappearing with every passing minute. Sarah, Daniel said, using her first name deliberately, trying to establish connection, build trust. I need you to be completely honest with me. How are you holding up? She glanced at him, and for just a moment, the professional mask slipped. I'm terrified, she admitted. I've trained for hydraulic failures, but total system failure, I've only done it in the simulator once, and I barely managed to land the plane. And that was with an instructor talking me through every step. I know, Daniel said quietly. I know exactly what this is. But here's what you need to understand. You've done everything right so far. You kept the aircraft stable. You contacted ATC. You called for help. That took presence of mind and skill. Now we're going to work together, and we're going to get everyone on this plane safely to Shannon. Do you believe me? Sarah met his eyes. Searching for false confidence, probably, for patronizing reassurance. Daniel gave her neither. He let her see the truth, that he was scared too, but that fear didn't mean failure. I believe you, she said finally. Good. Now, here's what we're going to do. I need you to maintain our current heading and altitude using differential thrust. You've been doing it instinctively. Throttle up the right engine slightly if we're rolling left, throttle down if we're rolling right. That's going to be our primary method of control from here on out. I'm going to coordinate with ATC, work through our approach planning, and prepare for landing procedures. We'll talk through every step together. Nothing happens unless we both understand it and agree. Understood? Understood. Daniel reached for the radio, his training asserting itself through the fear. How many times had he done this? Communicated during emergencies, coordinated complex operations, made life or death decisions in fractions of seconds? But never with 300 civilians counting on him, never with Emma's face floating behind his eyes, reminding him of everything he had to lose. He keyed the mic. Shannon Control, this is Flight 227. We have an experienced pilot in the cockpit now, requesting direct routing and complete emergency support. The controller's voice came back immediately, Irish accent, utterly calm. Flight 227, Shannon Control, roger that. We're clearing all traffic, you're priority 1. What are your specific needs? Complete hydraulic failure anticipated within 30 minutes, Daniel said. We'll need maximum runway length, fire and rescue standing by, and I want foam on the runway if you can manage it. This is going to be a differential thrust landing, possibly using emergency arrestor systems if available. A pause. Then, 227, confirm you said complete hydraulic failure? Affirmative. We're losing our third and final system now. I'll have manual control of engines only. Understood, 227. We're mobilizing all emergency resources. Runway 24 is our longest at 10,000 feet, winds currently calm. We'll have everything ready for you. Shannon, one more thing. I need you to run through landing calculations for a differential thrust landing with no hydraulic assist. I need to know our approach speed, touchdown target, and emergency stopping distance. Working on it now, 227. Stand by. Daniel set the mic down and turned back to Sarah. How are the controls feeling now? She moved the yoke gently, testing. Getting worse. Almost no response to elevator input. Ailerons are barely functional. Switch to pure engine control. Don't fight the yoke anymore. Throttles only. Sarah's hand shifted, abandoning the traditional flight controls. It went against every instinct Daniel knew. Pilots were trained to fly with the yoke, with the control surfaces. Using only engine thrust was like asking a pianist to play with elbows instead of fingers, but they didn't have a choice. The aircraft lurched slightly as Sarah made the adjustment, then steadied. She was a quick learner, Daniel noted, adapting to the new reality without panic. Good, he said. That's good. Now we need to start planning our descent. We can't just drop altitude normally. We need to do this gradually, using pitch changes from thrust adjustments. It's going to take time and precision. How do we control pitch without elevators? Physics. We throttle down the engines, we lose thrust, the nose drops. We throttle up, we gain thrust, the nose rises. But it's imprecise, and there's lag time. Every adjustment takes several seconds to register. So we have to think ahead, anticipate, stay smooth. The helicopter pilot appeared in the cockpit doorway. I've been coordinating with the cabin crew, he said. Passengers are secured. Medical personnel on board are checking on anyone with heart conditions or who might need extra support during landing. What else can I do? Daniel thought quickly. I need you to work with the flight attendants on emergency procedures. When we land, it's going to be rough. Maybe very rough. Make sure everyone knows the brace position, where the exits are, and that they stay seated until we come to a complete stop. No matter what they hear, what they see, they stay seated and belted. Can you handle that? Absolutely. The older man's eyes held respect. You've got this, son. I can see it. I hope you're right. As the man departed, Sarah spoke quietly. Can I ask you something? Why did you hesitate when they first asked for pilots? Daniel's hand stilled on the controls. I made a promise to my daughter that I'd stop flying, stop taking risks. I was supposed to be done with all of this. But you came anyway. I had to. He looked at her, seeing not just a frightened first officer, but a person, someone's daughter too, someone who deserved to go home. How could I not? Sarah nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I'm glad you broke your promise. Ask me again after we land. The next hour passed in a blur of coordination and preparation. Daniel talked constantly with Shannon Control, refining their approach, discussing scenarios, planning for every possible contingency. Sarah maintained their gradual descent, her hands steady on the throttles, even as sweat soaked through her uniform. They descended from 37,000 feet to 20,000, then 15,000. The clouds below began to take on definition, showing the curve of the Atlantic beneath. I can see lights, Sarah said suddenly. Is that Ireland? Daniel looked up from the approach charts he'd been reviewing. Through the windscreen, scattered lights punctured the darkness. That's the coast. Shannon should be about 30 minutes ahead. The radio crackled. 227 Shannon Control. We've completed our calculations. Recommend approach speed of 140 knots. Touchdown aim point 2,000 feet down, runway 24. We'll have arrestor cables deployed at 8,000 feet in case you need them, and the entire runway will be foamed. Emergency services are in position. 140 knots, faster than a normal landing, but necessary without hydraulic assist, and the arrestor cables, designed to catch aircraft like a naval carrier landing. They might be the only thing that stopped them if the differential thrust technique didn't work. Roger, Shannon, will be configured for 140 knots. 227, be advised. Wind has picked up slightly. Now 270 at 8 knots, gusting to 15. Still well within limits, but thought you should know. Crosswind. Of course there was a crosswind, because nothing about this could be simple. Copy the winds, Shannon. Daniel turned to Sarah. Okay, here's where it gets interesting. We need to align with the runway using only engine thrust in a crosswind with no way to make fine corrections. Everything has to be perfect on the first try because we won't get another chance. You understand? She nodded, pale but focused. I'm going to handle the approach and landing. I need you on the radio calling out our altitude, speed, and distance. Every 500 feet, every 10 knots of speed change, every mile from the runway. Be my eyes on the instruments while I fly. Can you do that? Yes. Sarah? He waited until she looked at him. You're going to do fine. We're going to do fine. The lights of Shannon Airport appeared in the distance, a constellation of white and red against the darkness. Daniel's hands found the throttles, feeling the engine's power, learning their response characteristics. Every aircraft was different. Every engine had its own personality. He had maybe 10 minutes to learn this one well enough to land it with surgical precision. Flight 227, you're 15 miles from runway 24, cleared for approach. All traffic is holding. The airport is yours. 227, Roger. 10 miles. Daniel began the final adjustments, throttling back to start their descent toward landing speed. The aircraft responded sluggishly, nose dropping with agonizing slowness. 1,200 feet, Sarah called. Speed 160. Distance 12 miles. Too fast. Daniel throttled back more. The engine's whine changed pitch. 1,000 feet. Speed 155. Distance 10 miles. Better. He could see the runway now, a long strip of lights bracketed by the red glow of emergency vehicles. Foam covered the surface, white against dark asphalt. 800 feet. Speed 145. Distance 8 miles. The crosswind pushed at them. Daniel felt it in the aircraft's drift, the way the runway appeared slightly left of center in the windscreen. He throttled up the right engines, throttled down the left. The aircraft yawed slowly, nose swinging right. 600 feet. Speed 140. Distance 6 miles. They were aligned. Perfect alignment. But maintaining it while continuing the descent, while managing the crosswind, while keeping the speed exact, it required absolute concentration. 400 feet. Speed 140. Distance 4 miles. The runway filled the windscreen. Daniel could see individual lights now, could see the foam spray patterns, could see the emergency vehicles positioned along the taxiway. 200 feet, speed 140, distance 2 miles. His hands made minute adjustments. Up on the right throttles, down on the left, back up. Tiny movements translated through engines into directional changes, into altitude corrections. 100 feet, speed 140, distance 1 mile. The runway rushed up at them. Daniel could see the touchdown markers, could see the arrestor cables stretched across the runway like thin threads. 50 feet, speed 140. Almost there. Almost. The aircraft hit a wind gust. The left wing dropped suddenly, the nose yawed right. Sarah gasped. Daniel's hands moved without thought, throttles adjusting, fighting the wind, fighting physics, fighting for control. 20 feet! The runway was right there, right beneath them. Daniel pulled all throttles to idle, letting gravity take them the final distance. The main wheels touched with a screech of rubber on foam. The aircraft bounced once, settled again. No brakes, no thrust reversers, nothing to slow them but air resistance and the hope that they'd catch the arrestor cables. They rocketed down the runway, hydroplaning on foam. 70 knots, 60, 50. The cables flashed beneath them, uncaught. Daniel saw the arrestor barrier at the runway's end, their last chance. He throttled up the engines briefly, steering them toward the barrier with a final burst of thrust, then cut all power. The nose wheel hit the barrier. The impact threw them forward against their harnesses. Metal screamed. The barrier cables engaged, designed to catch an aircraft's tailhook, but instead grabbing landing gear, fuselage, anything they could wrap around. The deceleration was violent, brutal. Equipment broke loose in the cabin. People screamed. The aircraft shuddered like a living thing dying. And then somehow, impossibly, they stopped. Complete silence fell over the cockpit. Daniel's hands were still on the throttles, locked there by adrenaline and muscle memory. His chest heaved with gasping breaths he didn't remember holding. Beside him, Sarah was crying, silent tears streaming down her face, even as she smiled, even as she reached over and gripped his arm with shaking fingers. "We're down," she whispered. "We're actually down." Through the windscreen, Daniel could see emergency vehicles racing toward them, lights flashing red and blue against the foam-white runway. He could hear sounds from the cabin, crying, shouting, the chaos of 300 people realizing they were alive. His hands finally released the throttles. They shook so badly he had to press them against his thighs to make them stop. The radio crackled. "Flight 227, Shannon Control. Emergency services are approaching. Are there any injuries?" Sarah reached for the mic, but her voice failed. Daniel took it from her gently. Shannon, 227, he said, his voice rough, strange in his own ears. We're okay. Everyone's okay. And then, because he couldn't help himself, because Emma's face filled his mind with crystal clarity, he added quietly, off the radio, I kept my promise, baby. I kept my promise. The emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft within 90 seconds of the barrier impact, their lights painting the foam-covered runway in strobing reds and blues. Daniel could hear the sounds now, metal creaking as the fuselage settled, hydraulic fluid dripping somewhere beneath them, the muffled chaos of voices from the cabin behind the locked cockpit door. Sarah had her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with the kind of crying that came from places deeper than relief. Daniel wanted to comfort her, to say something profound about what they'd just accomplished, but his own voice had deserted him. His hands still trembled against his thighs, adrenaline burning through his system with nowhere left to go. A sharp knock on the cockpit door made them both jump. Fire rescue, a heavily accented voice called through the reinforced barrier. We need to assess the cockpit crew. Can you open the door? Daniel forced himself to move. His legs felt disconnected from his body as he stood, gripping the back of the captain's seat for balance. The captain, Mitchell, still lay secured in the galley area where the crew had moved him. Margaret knelt beside him, 2 fingers pressed against his neck, her expression tight with concentration. He's breathing, she said without looking up. Pulse is thready, but present. We need paramedics now. Daniel unlocked the cockpit door. It swung open to reveal 2 firefighters in full gear, their faces smudged with foam residue, expressions a mixture of professional assessment and barely concealed awe. Anyone injured up here? The first one asked, his eyes sweeping the cockpit, taking in the maze of warning lights still illuminating the instrument panels like a perverse light show. Captain Mitchell needs immediate medical attention, Daniel said, his voice sounding strange and distant in his own ears. Possible cardiac event or stroke. First Officer Chen and I are uninjured. The firefighter nodded and spoke into his radio in rapid Irish-accented English, calling for medical teams. His partner moved past Daniel to check on Mitchell, professional hands already working, assessing, preparing. Through the open cockpit door, Daniel could see down the length of the cabin. Passengers were still in their seats, most with their heads still in brace position, some crying, others sitting in stunned silence. The flight attendants moved among them with practiced efficiency, checking for injuries, offering reassurance, maintaining order in the aftermath of controlled catastrophe. Sir? The first firefighter was addressing him now. We need to evacuate the aircraft. Standard procedure after an emergency landing of this nature. Are you able to assist with passenger evacuation, or should we? I'll help. The words came automatically. Daniel wasn't sure his legs would carry him, wasn't certain he could form coherent sentences, but standing still felt impossible. Movement was better than thinking, action better than processing what had just happened. Sarah stood as well, wiping her face with the back of her hand, transformation visible as training reasserted itself over emotion. I'll coordinate from the forward exits, she said, her voice steadier now. We should use slides on both sides, get people off as quickly as possible. The firefighter looked between them with something approaching reverence. That was some flying, he said quietly. I've been doing this 23 years, seen a lot of emergency landings. Never seen anyone bring down an aircraft with no hydraulics using differential thrust alone. That was... He shook his head. That was remarkable. Daniel felt Sarah's eyes on him but couldn't meet her gaze. Remarkable. The word sat wrong in his chest, too large, too weighted with implication. He'd done what physics and training allowed. Nothing remarkable about following procedures, about applying principles learned in classrooms and simulators. Except he'd promised never to be in this position again. Promised Emma. Promised Sarah, his wife, gone 3 years but still present in every decision he made. We need to move, Daniel said, pushing past the compliment, past the emotion threatening to surface. Let's get these people off the aircraft. The evacuation proceeded with surprising efficiency. Passengers filed through the forward and aft doors, sliding down the emergency chutes into the arms of waiting rescue personnel. Children cried, adults moved with shell-shocked precision, and through it all the flight attendants maintained order with voices that somehow stayed calm despite everything they'd just endured. Daniel stationed himself at the forward left exit, helping elderly passengers navigate the slide, catching children as they reached the bottom, offering hands and reassuring words that felt hollow in his own ears. Each person who passed carried their own story. The businessman who gripped Daniel's hand with both of his own and couldn't speak through his tears. The mother who held her infant so tightly, Daniel worried she might hurt the child. The teenage girl who looked at him with eyes too old for her face and whispered, "Thank you," like a prayer. 318 people. 318 souls who would go home tonight, who would see tomorrow, who would have the chance to keep whatever promises they'd made to whoever was waiting for them. The weight of it pressed down on Daniel's shoulders like physical mass. "That's everyone," Margaret announced, appearing at Daniel's elbow. The senior flight attendant looked exhausted, her uniform disheveled, her carefully styled hair coming loose from its pins. But her eyes were clear, focused. "Last count shows all passengers and crew accounted for except you, me, First Officer Chen, and the medical team with Captain Mitchell." "The captain. Stable enough to transport. They're bringing a stretcher onto the aircraft now. He'll be in the hospital within 10 minutes. She studied Daniel's face with the kind of perception that came from years of reading people in crisis. "You should go. We can handle the rest of the procedures from here." Daniel shook his head. "I'll stay until Mitchell is off the aircraft. After that, you're going to be swarmed by officials, investigators, probably media if they've gotten wind of what happened." Margaret's expression softened. "For what it's worth, you saved my life tonight. You saved all our lives. I hope you know that." Before Daniel could respond, before he could deflect or diminish or push away the gratitude that felt too large to accept, paramedics appeared carrying Captain Mitchell on a stretcher. The older pilot's face had more color now, an oxygen mask covering his nose and mouth, IV lines trailing from both arms. His eyes were closed, but Daniel could see the steady rise and fall of his chest. He'd live. They'd all live. The thought should have brought relief, but instead it brought a wave of exhaustion so profound Daniel had to lean against the aircraft's interior wall to stay upright. Sarah emerged from the aft section of the aircraft, her uniform jacket discarded somewhere, her white shirt stained with foam residue and sweat. She looked at Daniel and something passed between them. Recognition of shared experience, of having stood together at the edge of disaster and somehow pulled back. "The investigators are going to want statements," she said. "We should probably prepare for that." Daniel nodded. "You handled yourself incredibly well up there. Your training showed." "My training taught me how to fly with hydraulic systems." Sarah's laugh held an edge of hysteria. "Nothing in training prepared me for that. But you flew combat missions. You've dealt with emergencies before." "Not like this." Daniel's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Combat missions, you're prepared for things to go wrong. You accept the risk. But civilian aircraft, with families on board, children—" He stopped, unable to articulate the difference, the weight of responsibility that combat flying never carried despite its dangers. The paramedics were guiding Mitchell's stretcher down the forward stairs now, emergency personnel surrounding them in a protective formation. Through the aircraft's open door, Daniel could see the scene outside. Passengers being checked by medical teams, emergency vehicles positioned in careful formation, and in the distance a growing crowd of airport personnel and vehicles bearing the logos of various official agencies. Margaret had been right. The aftermath was about to become complicated. "We should go," Sarah said quietly. "Face it together?" Daniel looked at her. This young woman who'd held an aircraft steady through the impossible, who'd trusted a stranger when everything in her training probably said not to, who'd called out altitudes and speeds with unwavering precision even as terror threatened to overwhelm her. "Together," he agreed. They descended the forward stairs into the glare of emergency lights and the immediate attention of what seemed like dozens of officials. An airport operations manager appeared first, clipboard in hand, already firing questions about the aircraft's condition, the captain's status, the structural integrity of the fuselage after the barrier impact. Daniel answered on autopilot, his mind cataloging details while some deeper part of him remained in the cockpit, hands still on throttles that no longer existed, eyes still scanning instruments that had finally gone dark. "Daniel Harper?" The voice cut through the chaos with unexpected authority. Daniel turned to find a woman in her 50s approaching, wearing the crisp uniform of Ireland's Air Accident Investigation Unit. Her gray hair was pulled back severely, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes held something else, a sharp intelligence that immediately put Daniel on alert. "I'm Chief Investigator Patricia O'Brien," she said, extending her hand. "I'll be leading the investigation into this incident. I understand you're the pilot who landed the aircraft." Daniel shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip. "I assisted First Officer Chen. She maintained control of the aircraft throughout the emergency." O'Brien's eyes flicked to Sarah, assessing. "First Officer Chen, you have less than 1,000 hours total flight time. Is that correct?" Sarah straightened, defensive. 943 hours, ma'am, but I followed all emergency procedures and— "I'm not questioning your competence," O'Brien interrupted, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm establishing facts. Mr. Harper, you have significant military flight experience?" 20 years total aviation experience, Daniel confirmed. 8 years active duty Navy, flying FA-18 Hornets. 12 years in civilian consulting and evaluation work. But no recent commercial flight experience? "No, ma'am." O'Brien made a note on her tablet. "I'll need detailed statements from both of you. The investigation will likely take months, possibly years depending on what we find. For now, I need you to walk me through every decision made from the moment the hydraulic failures began." The next 3 hours blurred together in a haze of questions, technical explanations, and repetitive recounting of events that had lasted less than 90 minutes, but felt like a lifetime. Sarah remained at Daniel's side throughout, both of them answering O'Brien's relentless questioning while other investigators photographed the aircraft, examined the barrier impact damage, and collected data from every possible source. Other officials came and went, representatives from the airline, the aircraft manufacturer, insurance adjusters, and finally, inevitably, members of the media who'd somehow gained access to the secure area and shouted questions from behind barriers. "Is it true you had no hydraulic systems? How did you land without flight controls? Mr. Harper, are you a hero?" That last question hit Daniel like a physical blow. Hero. The word these strangers threw at him so casually, as if it meant something simple, as if it wasn't loaded with complexities they couldn't begin to understand. Heroes didn't break promises to their daughters. Heroes didn't spend 3 hours in a cockpit while a 7-year-old slept 3,000 miles away, trusting her father to come home safe. "I need a phone," Daniel said abruptly, interrupting O'Brien mid-question. "I need to call my daughter." The investigator's expression softened fractionally. "We're nearly finished here. Another 20 minutes, and you'll be free to— Now." Daniel's voice carried an edge he rarely used, the tone that had once commanded flight crews and subordinates. "I need to call my daughter now." O'Brien studied him for a long moment, then nodded. 20 minutes. Make your call, then we finish the preliminary statement. Fair enough?" Daniel didn't wait for further permission. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, fingers fumbling with the screen. The voicemail he'd left for his sister felt like it had been recorded in another lifetime, by someone else. What would he say to Emma? How did you explain to a 7-year-old that Daddy broke his promise but had a really good reason? The phone rang 4 times before his sister answered, her voice thick with sleep and alarm. "Daniel? Jesus, it's 4 in the morning. I'm okay," he said quickly. "I'm safe. I'm on the ground. Everything's okay." Silence. Then, "On the ground where?" "Daniel, what the hell is going on? I got your voicemail, and I've been sitting here for 3 hours trying to figure out if I should wake Emma up or wait, or call someone." "Don't wake her up," Daniel said firmly. "Please, Jess, don't wake her. I just needed you to know I'm safe. The flight had some problems, but we landed safely. Everyone's okay." "Some problems?" Jessica's voice rose. "Your voicemail sounded like you were saying goodbye. You scared me half to death." "What kind of problems?" Daniel closed his eyes, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "The kind that required me to help fly the plane. But it's over now. We're in Shannon, Ireland. I'm going to have to stay here for a few days for the investigation, but I'm safe. I'm okay. You flew the plane." Jessica's tone had shifted from fear to something harder to define. "Daniel, you promised. After Sarah died, you promised you were done with flying, done with risk. You promised Emma—" "I know what I promised." The words came out sharper than intended. But there were 300 people on that plane, Jess. What was I supposed to do? His sister was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler. You were supposed to do exactly what you did. I'm sorry. When I heard that voicemail, I thought, I know. Daniel's throat tightened. I'm sorry I scared you, but I need you to tell Emma something for me when she wakes up. Tell her that Daddy kept his promise. I know it doesn't make sense, but tell her I kept it. Can you do that? Daniel, please, Jess. Just tell her. Another pause. She's going to want to talk to you. What do I say? Tell her I'll call her tonight. Tell her... Daniel stopped, searching for words. Tell her I love her more than anything in the world, and that I'm coming home as soon as I can. Okay. Jessica's voice wavered. Okay. Be safe, little brother. And Daniel, whatever happened up there, whatever you had to do, I'm proud of you. The call ended before Daniel could respond. He stood there in the chaos of the emergency response area, phone still pressed to his ear, letting his sister's words settle over him like a blanket. Proud. Not angry, not disappointed, not questioning his judgment. Proud. Mr. Harper? Sarah stood a few feet away, her expression uncertain. The investigator wants to wrap up. Are you ready? Daniel pocketed his phone and nodded. Yeah, let's finish this. They returned to O'Brien's makeshift command post, a conference room in the airport's administration building that had been hastily converted into an investigation center. Charts covered one wall, photographs of the aircraft's damage spread across a table, and a laptop displayed what looked like flight data recorder information. Before we conclude, O'Brien said, settling into her chair with the air of someone preparing for a final assault, I need to understand the decision-making process in the cockpit. First Officer Chen, when did you determine you needed additional assistance? Sarah glanced at Daniel before answering. When Captain Mitchell collapsed, I knew I was in over my head. I've trained for single-pilot operations, but total hydraulic failure with an incapacitated captain, that's beyond my experience level. The decision to call for help was immediate. And Mr. Harper, when did you make the decision to assist? Daniel met O'Brien's gaze directly. When the flight attendant explained the situation, and I understood that First Officer Chen was facing a scenario that could overwhelm even an experienced pilot. You hesitated initially, though. According to witness statements, you didn't immediately respond to the captain's request for pilots. The observation hung in the air between them. Daniel could deflect, could offer technical explanations about assessing the situation first, but O'Brien's eyes told him she'd see through anything less than truth. I hesitated because I'd promised my family I wouldn't fly anymore, he said quietly. I walked away from aviation years ago to be present for my daughter. When the captain asked for pilots, my first instinct was to stay out of it. What changed your mind? A flight attendant explained that without help, the aircraft might not make it to the ground safely. At that point, my promise to my daughter meant nothing if I let 300 people die because I was too afraid to break it. O'Brien made a note, her expression unreadable. Afraid? Terrified, Daniel corrected, of breaking the promise, of the consequences, of screwing up and making things worse. Fear doesn't disappear just because you have experience. For the first time since the investigation began, something approaching respect flickered across O'Brien's face. Fear managed properly can make you cautious. Caution in aviation saves lives. Sometimes, Daniel agreed, and sometimes caution means recognizing when you're the only option available and acting anyway. O'Brien closed her tablet with a decisive snap. I've got what I need for now. You'll both need to remain available for follow-up questions as the investigation proceeds. The airline will arrange accommodation here in Shannon until we can clear you to travel. Is there anything else either of you need to tell me? Sarah shook her head. Daniel remained silent, mind already moving past the investigation to the practical realities waiting. He needed to contact his employer, explain why he'd missed the meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Needed to arrange for someone to cover Emma's pickup from school. Needed to figure out how to explain to his daughter why Daddy broke his promise. One more thing, O'Brien said as they stood to leave. Off the record, what you two accomplished tonight is going to be studied in flight schools for years. That's not hyperbole. Differential thrust landings with complete hydraulic failure have been attempted maybe a dozen times in aviation history. Most didn't end well. You managed it with a crosswind. At night, with minimal preparation. That's, she paused, choosing words carefully. That's exceptional airmanship. Sarah's face flushed with pride and exhaustion. Thank you, ma'am. Daniel just nodded, unable to trust his voice. They left the conference room together, emerging into the airport's main terminal where the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky beyond the windows. The terminal was nearly empty at this hour, just a handful of early morning travelers and airport staff going about their routines, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded on the runway outside. I should find out where they're putting us up, Sarah said, pulling out her phone. The airline should have sent information by now. Sarah. Daniel stopped her with a hand on her arm. You did everything right tonight. Don't let the investigation make you doubt that. She looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed very young. I froze at first. When the captain collapsed for maybe 30 seconds, I just froze. If you hadn't been there, but I was there. And you didn't freeze when it mattered. You kept the aircraft stable. You called for help. You trusted someone you'd never met to help you through an impossible situation. That takes courage and judgment. Don't minimize it. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back throughout the investigation. I thought we were going to die. When the last hydraulic system failed, when I felt the controls go completely dead, I thought that was it. And then you made it look possible. Like it was something we could actually do. It was something you could do, Daniel corrected gently. You were already doing it when I got to the cockpit. I just helped you believe in what you already knew. They stood there in the empty terminal as dawn broke fully outside, two pilots who'd shared something most would never experience or understand. The bond forged in that cockpit would last, Daniel knew. Years from now, they'd be able to look at each other and remember without words what it felt like to hold 300 lives in balance and somehow, impossibly, bring them all safely home. Get some rest, Daniel said finally. We both need it. Sarah nodded and moved toward the terminal exit where airline representatives were waiting. Daniel followed more slowly, his body heavy with exhaustion, his mind still processing everything that had happened. His phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. Emma's awake. She knows something's up. Call soon? Daniel found a quiet corner of the terminal and dialed. His sister answered immediately. I'm putting you on speaker, Jessica warned. She's right here. Hi, baby, Daniel said, his voice catching. Daddy? Emma's small voice carried across 3,000 miles and straight into his heart. Aunt Jess said you helped people on an airplane. Did you fly again? Honesty. He'd always promised her honesty. Yeah, sweetheart, I did. The pilots needed help, and I was the only person who could give it. Silence. Then, but you promised you wouldn't fly anymore. I know, and I meant that promise when I made it, but sometimes he struggled for words a 7-year-old could understand. Sometimes keeping one promise means you have to bend another one. There were families on that plane, Emma, kids like you, with daddies and mommies trying to get home to them. I couldn't let them be in danger if I could help. More silence. Daniel's heart hammered, waiting for anger or tears or disappointment. Did you save them? Emma asked finally. The first officer and I worked together, and yes, we saved them. Everyone's safe. Then you're a hero. Her voice carried absolute certainty, the kind only children possessed. Heroes save people, and you saved people, so you're a hero. Daniel's throat closed completely. He couldn't speak, couldn't respond to his daughter's simple logic and absolute faith. Jessica's voice came through the speaker. Em, why don't you go pick out what you want for breakfast? I need to talk to Uncle Daniel for just a minute. Small footsteps retreating, a door closing. She's been worried, Jessica said quietly, but she's also incredibly proud. You should have seen her face when I told her what you did. I broke my promise to her, Jess. No, his sister said firmly. You kept the most important promise. You promised to always do the right thing, to always be someone she could be proud of. You kept that promise. The rest is just details. Daniel leaned against the wall, letting his sister's words wash over him. Maybe she was right. Maybe promises weren't always about the literal words, but about the principles behind them. He'd promised to be careful, to avoid unnecessary risk. Landing a crippled aircraft wasn't unnecessary risk. It was necessary action. "I need to stay here a few more days," he said, "for the investigation. Can you handle things with Emma?" "Of course. Take whatever time you need. We'll be fine. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'll be home soon." "I will. And Daniel, whatever happens next, whatever comes from all this, you did good tonight. Remember that." The call ended. Daniel remained in his corner of the terminal, watching dawn fully break through the windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Emergency vehicles still surrounded the aircraft on the distant runway, and he could see investigators moving around the fuselage, documenting every detail. His phone buzzed again. An email this time from his employer. "Saw the news. Take whatever time you need. Proud to have you on our team." News. Right. This would be news. International news, probably. Emergency landing, no hydraulics, dramatic rescue. The media would love it, would want interviews and sound bites and dramatic retellings. Daniel's stomach turned at the thought. He didn't want to be a story, didn't want to be examined and celebrated and dissected by strangers who didn't understand what it cost to sit in that cockpit and make those decisions. "Mr. Harper?" He looked up to find an airline representative approaching, professional concern written across her features. "We have a hotel room arranged for you. If you'll follow me, we have a car waiting to take you there. You look like you could use some rest." Rest? The concept seemed foreign, impossible. How was he supposed to sleep when his mind kept replaying every moment, every decision, every fraction of a second where things could have gone differently? But his body betrayed him. The adrenaline was gone, burned through completely, leaving only bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. "Thank you," he managed. The hotel was mercifully close, and the room was quiet and dark. Daniel collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, intending to just lie down for a moment, to gather his thoughts before calling Emma again, before facing whatever came next. He fell asleep with his phone still in his hand and his daughter's voice echoing in his mind. "Then you're a hero." But heroes didn't cry themselves to sleep, didn't wake up shaking from dreams of everything that could have gone wrong, didn't carry the weight of promises broken and kept in equal measure. Heroes were supposed to be certain, sure, unshakable. Daniel Harper was none of those things. He was just a father who'd tried to keep his promises and ended up breaking the most important one to save 300 strangers. And he had no idea if that made him a hero or just a man who'd run out of better options. Daniel woke to his phone vibrating against the nightstand, his body jerking upright before his mind fully registered consciousness. The hotel room was dark, curtains drawn against what his disoriented brain couldn't determine was day or night. His mouth tasted like metal and exhaustion, his uniform shirt twisted and damp with sweat. The phone showed 23 missed calls and 47 text messages. The current caller ID read unknown number. He answered without thinking. "Harper." "Mr. Harper, this is Rebecca Thornton from CNN International. I'm hoping you might have a few minutes to discuss last night's emergency landing. Our viewers are fascinated by..." Daniel ended the call and stared at the screen. CNN. The media had found him already, less than 12 hours after the landing. He scrolled through the missed calls. 3 different news networks, 2 newspapers, several numbers he didn't recognize, and 5 calls from his employer's PR department. One text message stood out, sent 2 hours ago from Sarah Chen. "They found me too. Don't answer anyone until we talk to the airline's legal team." This is getting crazy. Crazy was an understatement. Daniel pulled up a news app and immediately wished he hadn't. The landing was the top story on every major outlet. Video footage showed the aircraft surrounded by emergency vehicles, foam-covered runway gleaming under floodlights. Headlines screamed variations of miracle landing, and hero pilot saves hundreds with his name prominently featured. His stomach twisted. This was exactly what he'd feared, what he'd tried to avoid by walking away from aviation years ago. The attention, the scrutiny, the transformation of a desperate situation into entertainment for people who'd never understand the reality of those 90 minutes. Another call came through, this time from a number he recognized, Patricia O'Brien, the lead investigator. "Mr. Harper, I need you to refrain from speaking to media until the preliminary investigation is complete," she said without preamble. "The airline should have briefed you on this already, But given the media attention this incident is receiving, I wanted to emphasize it directly. Any public statements could compromise the investigation. I wasn't planning on talking to anyone, Daniel said, his voice rough from sleep. Good. Unfortunately, that won't stop them from trying. I'd recommend staying in your hotel room until we can arrange more secure transport. There are reporters in the lobby. Daniel moved to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain. The hotel entrance 3 floors below was indeed crowded with people holding cameras and microphones, a small cluster of media vultures waiting for prey. How did they find me this fast? Passenger manifests aren't as private as they should be, O'Brien said dryly. And in today's world, everyone has a camera phone. There are already a dozen videos online from inside the cabin during the evacuation. Some passengers have been quite vocal about their gratitude. Your name is everywhere. Daniel let the curtain fall back. What do I do? Stay put. The airline is arranging a press conference for this afternoon. You and First Officer Chen will make a brief statement, answer a few questions under controlled circumstances, and hopefully that will satisfy the media's appetite enough for you to get home without being hounded. Can you be ready at 2 o'clock? He glanced at his watch. Nearly 11 in the morning. He'd slept for almost 7 hours but felt like he'd barely closed his eyes. I'll be ready. Good. A car will collect you at 1:30. And Mr. Harper, prepare yourself. This is going to be intense. The call ended before he could ask what she meant by intense. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at the walls of a hotel room in a country where he'd never intended to be, dealing with consequences he'd never wanted to face. His phone rang again. This time it was his sister. Tell me you haven't read the comments on the news articles, Jessica said immediately. I've barely looked at the news at all. Good. Keep it that way. Some of it is wonderful, people calling you a hero, sharing the story, expressing gratitude. But there's also a lot of... She paused, choosing words carefully. There are people questioning why you were allowed to fly the plane without being part of the crew. Armchair experts analyzing every decision, debating whether you did the right thing. It's gross, Daniel. Just ignore all of it. Daniel's jaw tightened. Of course there were critics. There were always critics. People who'd never faced impossible choices, second-guessing those who had. I'm doing a press conference this afternoon, he said. Then hopefully I can get a flight home. Emma wants to talk to you. She's been asking all morning. Put her on. A rustling sound, then his daughter's voice, bright and excited in a way that made his chest ache. Daddy, everyone at school is talking about you. Mrs. Patterson showed us the news on the computer and said you're a real-life hero. Daniel closed his eyes. Em, listen to me. I'm not a hero. I just helped some people who needed it. That's all. But the news says you saved 300 people. That's like so many people, Daddy. Did you really land the plane with no controls? The first officer and I worked together, sweetheart. It wasn't just me. When are you coming home? I made you a card. It has an airplane on it and everything. The simple innocence of her excitement cut deeper than any critic's words could. She was proud of him, viewed the situation through the clear lens of childhood, where actions were good or bad, where saving people made you a hero, end of story. I'll be home as soon as I can, he promised, maybe tomorrow or the next day, and I can't wait to see that card. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby. More than anything. After he ended the call, Daniel sat in the silent hotel room for a long moment before forcing himself into the shower. The hot water helped clear his head, washing away the physical residue of the previous night, even if it couldn't touch the emotional weight. He was toweling off when someone knocked on the door. Mr. Harper, it's Margaret Riley from the flight crew. I have some clothes for you. The airline sent them over. Figured you might want something clean for the press conference. Daniel wrapped the towel around his waist and cracked the door open. Margaret stood in the hallway, holding a garment bag and a genuine smile. May I come in? I promise I'm not secretly a reporter. He stepped back, letting her enter. She hung the garment bag on the closet door and turned to face him with an expression that was part gratitude, part concern. How are you holding up? She asked. I've had better days. I imagine you have. Margaret settled into the room's single chair. I wanted to thank you properly, away from all the chaos and official statements. What you did last night, I've been flying for 32 years, and I've never seen anything like it. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. And more importantly, I need you to hear it, because I suspect you're not comfortable with any of this attention, and I can see the weight you're carrying. But you should know that every single person on that aircraft, passengers and crew, we're all going home because of you. That matters, Daniel. It matters more than any discomfort you're feeling right now. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted again despite the sleep and shower. I broke a promise to my daughter. I told her I wouldn't fly anymore, that I'd stay safe, stay present. And the first real crisis that came along, I broke that promise. Margaret was quiet for a moment, her experienced eyes studying him with the kind of perception that came from years of reading people in confined spaces. Can I tell you something about promises? I have 3 kids, all grown now. And when they were young, I promised I'd always be there for them. Never miss a recital, a game, a birthday. You know how many of those promises I broke over 32 years of flying international routes? Hundreds. Literally hundreds. That's different. Is it? I chose this job knowing it would take me away from them, knowing I'd miss moments I could never get back. And yes, I felt guilty every single time. But you know what my kids remember now that they're adults? Not the missed recitals. They remember that their mother had a career she was passionate about, that she showed them what it meant to work hard, to be professional, to contribute something meaningful to the world. They're proud of what I do. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Your daughter will understand someday that you didn't break your promise. You honored a deeper one. The promise to be the kind of person she can look up to, who does the right thing even when it's hard, who helps people who need it. That's the promise that matters. Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to accept the absolution she was offering, but the weight in his chest wouldn't lift. I was terrified, he admitted quietly. The whole time I was absolutely terrified. Good, Margaret said. Fear means you understood the stakes. Anyone who wouldn't be terrified in that situation is too stupid to be trusted with 300 lives. She stood, moving toward the door. The clothes should fit. The airline guessed your size based on your passport information. I'll see you at the press conference. She paused at the door, hand on the handle. For what it's worth, my kids are going to be hearing about you tonight at dinner. About the pilot who came out of retirement to save a plane full of strangers. That's the story I'm telling them. That's the story that matters. After she left, Daniel opened the garment bag to find a simple dark suit, white shirt, and conservative tie. Professional, appropriate for cameras and questions, and the performance he'd have to give in a few hours. He dressed slowly, each movement methodical, buying time before he had to face whatever came next. His phone continued to buzz with incoming messages, but he ignored them all except one from Sarah. They're putting us both up at the same hotel. I'm in 412 if you want to talk before the press conference. Might help to get our stories straight. Daniel checked his watch. 12:30. He had an hour before the car arrived. Talking to Sarah made sense. They needed to present a unified front, needed to anticipate the questions they'd face. He found her room on the 4th floor and knocked. She answered immediately, dressed in a crisp airline uniform that made her look older than her 26 years, more authoritative. Her hair was pulled back severely, makeup applied with precision. You look official, Daniel said. The airline's PR team sent over instructions. Sarah gestured him inside. Apparently we're supposed to look competent and humble simultaneously. I'm not sure that's possible, but I'm trying. Her room was identical to his, but the bed was neatly made, clothes hung precisely in the closet, everything organized with military efficiency. A laptop sat open on the desk, displaying what looked like talking points. They sent you a script? Daniel asked. More like suggestions, things to emphasize, things to avoid. Basically, we're supposed to praise the training we received, express gratitude to the emergency services, acknowledge the teamwork that made it possible, and deflect any attempts to make either of us into heroes. She looked at him, uncertainty flickering across her professional facade. They also suggested we minimize the severity of the situation, avoid making it sound too dramatic. Daniel's laugh held no humor. How exactly do we minimize complete hydraulic failure at 37,000 feet? I asked the same question. The PR person said we should focus on the successful outcome rather than dwelling on the dangers. They're worried about the airline's liability, I think. If we make it sound too dire, people might question why it happened in the first place. People should question why it happened. That's what investigations are for. Sarah closed the laptop and turned to face him fully. Daniel, can I ask you something? And I want an honest answer. How close did we actually come to not making it? The question hung between them, weighted with everything they'd both been avoiding thinking about too directly. Daniel moved to the window, looking out at the city of Shannon below, people going about their ordinary lives completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded in their skies the night before. In aviation, there's a concept called the error chain, he said finally. It's the idea that accidents rarely happen because of a single failure. Instead, they're the result of multiple small errors or problems that compound each other, break any link in the chain, and disaster is averted. I know the concept. Last night, we had about 8 links in that chain. The hydraulic failure itself, the captain's medical emergency, the crosswind during approach, the timing of when we lost the final system. Any one of those in isolation would have been manageable. But all of them together? He turned to face her. I'd say we had maybe a 60% chance of walking away from that landing. Sarah's face paled. 60%? That's being optimistic. Landing a commercial aircraft using only differential thrust has been attempted maybe a dozen times in history. More than half of those attempts ended with fatalities. We had darkness, weather, minimal preparation time, and an aircraft that wasn't designed for that kind of operation. The fact that we succeeded is... He stopped, searching for the right word. It's statistically improbable. So we got lucky. We got lucky, and we were skilled, and we made good decisions under pressure. All 3 had to be true for everyone to survive. Sarah sank onto the edge of the bed, her carefully constructed professional composure cracking. And we're supposed to go down there and tell reporters it was just routine procedure, just good training and teamwork? We tell them the truth in a way they can hear it, Daniel said. We explain that aviation is built on layers of safety, that our training prepared us to handle emergencies, that the aircraft's design allowed for alternative control methods. All of that is true. We just don't need to emphasize how close those safety layers came to failing. Doesn't that feel dishonest? It feels practical. The people who need to know the full truth, the investigators, the safety boards, the engineers who can learn from this, they'll get all the details. The public doesn't need to know that 300 people came within inches of dying. What good does that serve except to terrify them about flying? Sarah considered this, her expression troubled. I guess I just don't want to minimize what you did, what we did. It matters that it was hard. It matters that we had to do something extraordinary. It matters to us, Daniel agreed, and it'll matter in the investigation reports. But for today, for the press conference, we focus on the outcome. Everyone survived. That's the story that matters. A knock on the door interrupted them. Margaret's voice called through. The car's here early. We need to go now. Apparently the media presence is growing and the airline wants to get ahead of it. They rode to the airport in silence, Daniel and Sarah in the back of a black sedan with tinted windows, Margaret in the front seat coordinating with the PR team via phone. The car took them directly to a hangar that had been converted into a makeshift press conference venue, complete with a raised platform, microphones, and enough cameras to broadcast to the world. Patricia O'Brien met them at the entrance, her expression grim. This is bigger than we anticipated. We've got representatives from at least 15 international news organizations, plus local media, aviation bloggers, and several passengers who want to make statements. The airline is limiting this to 45 minutes, and you two will speak for no more than 10 of those. Keep your answers brief, professional, and avoid speculation about the cause of the hydraulic failures. Clear? Clear, Sarah said, her voice tight. Daniel just nodded, his attention caught by the scene visible through the hangar's interior. Rows of chairs filled with reporters, cameras mounted on tripods, lights positioned to eliminate any shadow or privacy. This wasn't a press conference, it was a spectacle. One more thing, O'Brien said quietly. There are several passengers in attendance who've been quite vocal about their gratitude. Don't be surprised if they try to approach you. The airline security will prevent direct contact, but be prepared for emotion. They were led through a side entrance to a small room behind the platform where airline executives waited, all wearing expressions of practiced concern. A PR director, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and sharper suit, approached immediately. Mr. Harper, First Officer Chen, I'm Diana Marsh. I'll be moderating the questions today. We'll start with a brief statement from the airline CEO. Then each of you will make a short statement. Then we'll take questions. I'll cut off anything too technical or anything that veers toward assigning blame. Your job is to be competent, humble, and grateful. Think you can manage that? Something in her tone made Daniel's jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. We'll do our best. Good. We go live in 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes passed in a blur of last-minute instructions, microphone checks, and the growing buzz of the assembled media on the other side of the curtain. Daniel found himself standing next to Sarah, both of them waiting for a cue to step into lights and questions and judgment from people who hadn't been there, who couldn't understand, who would nevertheless feel entitled to opinions about every decision made. You ready? Sarah whispered. No, Daniel admitted. You? Terrified. Good. Fear means we're taking this seriously. Sarah glanced at him, a small smile breaking through her tension. Someone wise told me that earlier. The curtain opened, lights blazed, cameras clicked and whirred. Daniel stepped onto the platform with Sarah at his side, the CEO on her other side, all of them arranged for maximum visual impact. The CEO spoke first, his statement carefully crafted to express gratitude for the outcome while avoiding any admission of fault or failure. He praised the crew's professionalism, the aircraft's safety systems, and the excellent response from Irish Emergency Services. He managed to speak for 5 minutes without saying anything substantive. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stepped to the microphone with visible nervousness, but her voice came out steady and clear. Last night presented challenges that tested everything I've learned in my training, she said. When Captain Mitchell became incapacitated, I knew I needed help. Mr. Harper's experience and calm guidance made it possible to bring the aircraft safely to the ground. I'm grateful to him, to our cabin crew, to the air traffic controllers, and to everyone who contributed to ensuring all our passengers and crew survived. Brief, professional, appropriately humble. Exactly what the PR team had requested. Then all eyes turned to Daniel. He stepped to the microphone, suddenly aware of how many people were watching, not just in this hangar, but worldwide. Whatever he said would be quoted, analyzed, judged. Emma would hear it. His colleagues would hear it. Sarah's family, Captain Mitchell's family, the families of every passenger would hear it. I'm a father first, he began, the words coming without the script the PR team had suggested. Everything I do, every decision I make starts from that truth. Last night, when I heard that an aircraft was in trouble, my first thought was of my own daughter and the promise I made to her to stay safe. My second thought was of all the other daughters and sons and parents on that plane who deserved to get home safely. He paused, seeing Diana Marsh's expression tighten. This wasn't the humble professional statement they'd wanted. First Officer Chen is an exceptional pilot who managed an impossible situation with skill and grace. The cabin crew maintained order and calm under circumstances that would have broken most people. Captain Mitchell, before his medical emergency, made critical decisions that gave us the foundation to survive. What happened last night wasn't about one person being a hero. It was about a team of professionals doing what we're trained to do and getting a little lucky in the process. I don't know what caused the hydraulic failures. That's for the investigation to determine. What I do know is that aviation is one of the safest forms of transportation because we learn from every incident, because we build redundancy into every system, and because we train obsessively for scenarios we pray never happen. Last night, that training worked, the systems worked, we worked, and 318 people are going home because of it. He stepped back from the microphone. Diana Marsh looked like she wanted to strangle him for going off script, but the reporters were already shouting questions, hands raised, voices competing. Marsh selected a reporter from the front row. Mr. Harper, is it true you haven't flown an aircraft operationally in over a decade? That's correct. I left active aviation 12 years ago. So how were you able to land a commercial aircraft you'd never flown before, with no time to prepare? Daniel considered the question, aware of Sarah listening beside him, aware of every word being recorded for posterity. Principles of flight are consistent across aircraft types. Thrust, lift, drag, weight. These don't change whether you're flying a fighter jet or a commercial airliner. The specific procedures differ, but the fundamental physics remain the same. First Officer Chen knew this aircraft intimately. I understood emergency flight operations. Together, we had what we needed. Another reporter. First Officer Chen, how did you feel when you realized you needed help? Sarah leaned toward her microphone. Scared, she admitted, but also determined. I knew my passengers were depending on me to make good decisions. Asking for help was the right decision. Mr. Harper, you mentioned your daughter. What did she say when she found out what you'd done? The question hit harder than any technical query could. Daniel's throat tightened, but he forced himself to answer. She told me I was a hero. I told her I was just her dad, doing what had to be done. Do you consider yourself a hero? No, Daniel said firmly. I consider myself fortunate that I was in a position to help and had the training to do so. The real heroes are the people who helped me keep my promise to come home. First Officer Chen, the cabin crew, the emergency responders. They're the ones who deserve recognition. Marsh cut in, pointing to another reporter. Question for First Officer Chen. But the reporter ignored her, focusing instead on Daniel. Mr. Harper, there are reports that you initially refused to help when the captain first asked for pilots. Can you explain why? The question silenced the room. Daniel felt Sarah tense beside him, felt the weight of cameras capturing his reaction. He could deflect, could offer a technical explanation about assessing the situation first, but something about the reporter's tone, the implication of cowardice or hesitation, sparked a response he couldn't suppress. I'd promised my daughter I wouldn't fly anymore, he said quietly. After my wife died, I promised I'd be there for every morning, every night, every moment she needed me. Taking risks, putting myself in danger, that wasn't compatible with being the father she deserved. So yes, when I first heard that call for pilots, my instinct was to stay seated, to honor the promise I'd made to the most important person in my life. He paused, letting the silence stretch. But then a flight attendant explained the situation, explained that without help, 300 people might not make it home. And I realized that my promise to my daughter had to coexist with my responsibility as a human being. Sometimes you can't honor one promise without bending another. That's a hard truth, but it's truth nonetheless. The reporters erupted with follow-up questions, but Marsh was already stepping forward, cutting off the session. That's all the time we have. Thank you all for coming. Security personnel appeared, guiding Daniel and Sarah away from the platform and back through the side entrance as reporters shouted after them. Diana Marsh followed, her expression somewhere between fury and grudging respect. That was not what we discussed, she said sharply once they were back in the private room. You were supposed to stick to professional statements, not tell the truth, Daniel interrupted, not admit to being human. Not give them emotional sound bites that will dominate the coverage. Marsh's control slipped for the first time. Do you have any idea how that will play? The reluctant hero angle, the devoted father forced to choose? They'll run that story into the ground. Good, Daniel said. Let them. At least it's honest. Marsh looked like she wanted to argue further, but O'Brien appeared in the doorway. That's enough, the investigator said calmly. The press conference is over. Mr. Harper and First Officer Chen have fulfilled their obligations to the airline and the media. Now they're done. She gestured for them to follow her, leading them through a back corridor away from the hangar and the media circus still assembled there. They emerged into a quiet area where a single car waited. This will take you back to the hotel, O'Brien said. You're both clear to leave Ireland as soon as you can arrange flights. The investigation will continue, but we have everything we need from you for now. We'll be in touch if we have follow-up questions. Sarah spoke for the first time since leaving the platform. Is Captain Mitchell okay? Have you heard anything? He's stable. Suffered a minor stroke, but the prognosis is good. He'll make a full recovery. O'Brien's expression softened slightly. He wanted me to tell you both that he's proud of how you handled his aircraft. Those were his exact words. Something in Daniel's chest eased at that. Mitchell, a pilot he had never met before last night, was proud of them. It shouldn't matter, but somehow it did. They rode back to the hotel in silence, both too exhausted for conversation. When they reached Sarah's floor, she paused before getting out. Thank you, she said, for telling the truth up there, for not pretending it was easy or simple. You deserved honesty. They all did. Sarah nodded and disappeared into the hallway. Daniel continued to his own floor, his mind already moving toward home, toward Emma, toward figuring out how to rebuild the normal life he'd interrupted when he stood up on Flight 227. His phone rang as he entered his room. An unknown number again, but something made him answer. Mr. Harper, this is James Patterson. I was in seat 23C last night. My wife and 2 daughters were with me. The man's voice cracked. I just wanted to call and say, I don't have words for what you did. My girls are 7 and 5. They get to grow up now because of you. They get to have birthdays and graduations and weddings because of you. Daniel sank onto the bed, unable to speak. I know you don't think you're a hero, Patterson continued. I heard what you said at the press conference, but you're wrong. You're my daughter's hero. You're my hero, and I needed you to know that. The call ended before Daniel could respond. He sat there holding the phone, feeling the weight of one father's gratitude settling over him like a blanket, warming and suffocating at the same time. 318 people, 318 stories like Patterson's, families who got to stay intact, futures that got to unfold, and one promise to a 7-year-old girl that would never be quite the same again. Daniel pulled up his phone and dialed his sister. I'm coming home tomorrow, he said when she answered. Can you have Emma there when I arrive? I need to see her. Of course, she can't wait to see you either. She's been practicing what she's going to say when you walk in. What's that? Jessica's smile was audible through the phone. That she's proud of you. That's all she keeps saying. She's so proud of you. Daniel closed his eyes, finally letting the tears come that he'd been holding back since the moment he'd stepped into that cockpit. Proud. His daughter was proud. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The flight home departed Shannon at 9 the next morning, a different airline, a different aircraft, but the same Atlantic crossing that had nearly ended in disaster 48 hours earlier. Daniel sat in seat 12A this time, watching through the window as Ireland disappeared beneath cloud cover, his chest tight with the kind of anxiety he'd never experienced in thousands of hours of flight time. Every sound registered with hyper-awareness. The change in engine pitch during climb, the hydraulic whine of flaps retracting, the subtle vibration of air flowing over control surfaces. His body cataloged each sensation against a mental database of normal versus abnormal, alert for any deviation that might signal the beginning of another cascade failure. First time back in the air since the incident? Daniel turned to find an older gentleman in 12B watching him with knowing eyes. Military bearing, silver hair cut precise and short, the kind of posture that never entirely faded even decades after service ended. That obvious? Daniel asked. Only to someone who's been there. I flew Hueys in Vietnam, took me 3 months to get back in a helicopter after we got shot down outside Da Nang. The man extended his hand. Robert Cassidy. And yes, I know who you are. Saw the press conference. Hell of a thing you did. Daniel shook his hand, the grip firm and assured. Daniel Harper. And I'm trying not to think about it too much. That's the problem with almost dying. Makes you acutely aware of how thin the margin really is between routine and catastrophe. Cassidy settled back in his seat, his gaze still sharp despite his years. Every flight I took for 6 months after Da Nang, I sat there cataloging every sound, every vibration, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Drove my wife crazy, drove me crazier. How'd you get past it? Time, mostly, and the realization that fear is just information. Your body's way of saying, pay attention, this matters. The trick is learning to acknowledge the fear without letting it control you. Cassidy glanced out the window at the clouds streaming past. You've got a daughter, right? Heard you mention her at the press conference. Emma, she's 7. Then you've got the best reason in the world to work through this. Kids need to see their parents face fear and come out the other side. Teaches them more than any lecture ever could. Daniel considered this, watching the clouds part momentarily to reveal the dark Atlantic far below. The same ocean he'd crossed 2 nights ago, the same impossible distance between continents. But that flight had ended with everyone walking away. This one would too. Statistically, logically, certainly, his body just needed time to believe what his mind already knew. The flight continued without incident. Smooth air, professional crew, the kind of boring routine that aviation depended on and passengers took for granted. Daniel forced himself to read, to watch a movie, to exist in the normality of commercial air travel, even as part of his brain remained on high alert. 7 hours later, they touched down at JFK. The landing was gentle, professional, utterly unremarkable. Daniel felt something in his chest ease as the wheels kissed the runway and the aircraft settled into its rollout. Just another flight, just another landing. The world kept turning, kept functioning, kept proving that the catastrophic was exceptional rather than inevitable. He cleared customs and emerged into the arrivals hall to find Jessica and Emma waiting behind the barrier, his daughter practically vibrating with barely contained energy. The moment she spotted him, she ducked under the barrier and ran, all flying dark curls and gap-toothed smile. Daniel dropped his carry-on and caught her as she launched herself at him, small arms wrapping around his neck with the fierce intensity only children could manage. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and the vanilla body spray Jessica let her use on special occasions. "You're home," Emma whispered against his shoulder. "You're really home." "I'm really home, baby." Daniel held her tight, feeling the solid reality of her weight, her warmth, her existence. This was what mattered. This moment, this child, this promise he'd somehow managed to keep despite everything. Jessica approached more slowly, her eyes suspiciously bright. She pulled Daniel into a one-armed hug, Emma still clinging to him like a barnacle. "You look like hell," she said affectionately. "Feel like it too. Come on, let's get you home." The drive to his apartment in Queens was filled with Emma's chatter, questions tumbling over each other faster than Daniel could answer. What did the cockpit look like? Were the controls really broken? Was he scared? Did he wear a special uniform? Had he seen the videos people posted online? That last question made Daniel glance at Jessica, who shrugged apologetically. "She Googled you," his sister admitted. "I couldn't stop her. Every kid in her class was talking about it." "What did you see, Em?" Daniel asked carefully. "Videos from inside the plane, people were crying and praying and stuff, and then videos of everyone getting off the plane, and they were all happy and hugging." Emma twisted in her seat to look at him directly. "Mrs. Patterson said you're a real hero, like from the movies. She said we should be really proud." "What do you think?" Daniel asked. "Not what Mrs. Patterson said. What do you think?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, her expression serious in the way children's faces sometimes became when grappling with concepts too large for their vocabulary. "I think you were scared, but you helped anyway," she said finally. "That's what heroes do, right? They're scared, but they do it anyway because people need help." Daniel's throat tightened. "Yeah, sweetheart, that's exactly what heroes do." "So you're my hero." Emma said it with absolute certainty, then turned back around in her seat, apparently considering the matter completely settled. Jessica caught Daniel's eye in the rear-view mirror, her expression saying everything she couldn't voice with Emma present. Pride and concern and relief mixed together, the complex emotions of family watching family navigate impossible situations. They reached Daniel's apartment as late afternoon faded into evening, the autumn light painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The building looked exactly the same as when he'd left for Germany a week ago, but Daniel felt like he was seeing it through different eyes. The security door he'd walked through 1,000 times. The elevator that always squeaked on the 3rd floor. The hallway with Mrs. Chen's door that always smelled like ginger and garlic. Home. Ordinary, familiar, safe. Emma ran ahead to their apartment door, waiting impatiently for Daniel to unlock it. The moment he did, she disappeared inside, calling back, "I have to show you something." Daniel and Jessica followed more slowly. His sister touched his arm, stopping him just inside the doorway. "The press has been calling," she said quietly. "Your office too. Apparently there's been a lot of interest in interviews, appearances, that sort of thing. I've been letting everything go to voicemail, but you should know it's not going to just disappear." "I'm not doing interviews." "I figured, but they're persistent, and Daniel—" She hesitated. "Some of the passengers have been posting about wanting to thank you in person. There's this whole thing online, people organizing some kind of event. It's sweet, but also kind of overwhelming." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Of course there was. In the age of social media, nothing stayed private, nothing stayed simple. A crisis became a story became content. Content became something to be shared and discussed and transformed into whatever narrative people wanted to attach to it. "I just want things to go back to normal," he said. "I know." But normal might look a little different now. Emma reappeared clutching a piece of construction paper covered in crayon drawings. An airplane, recognizable despite the creative interpretation of aerodynamics, dominated the center, surrounded by hearts and stars. At the top, in Emma's careful 7-year-old printing, "My Daddy the Hero." "I made it at school," she announced proudly. "Everyone signed it, see?" She pointed to the various names scrawled around the margins in different colors and handwriting styles. "And Mrs. Patterson wrote this part." Daniel read the teacher's edition, written in neat adult script at the bottom. "Emma, your father showed us all what courage and selflessness look like. You should be very proud." "It's beautiful, Em," Daniel managed, his voice rough. "Thank you." "I'm going to put it on the fridge." Emma grabbed the drawing back and ran toward the kitchen, her mission clear and important. Jessica squeezed Daniel's shoulder. "I should go. Let you two have some time together, but call me if you need anything. And Daniel, try to let yourself feel proud of what you did. You've earned it." After she left, Daniel found Emma in the kitchen, carefully affixing her artwork to the refrigerator with 4 different magnets, ensuring it was perfectly centered and secure. "There," she said with satisfaction. "Now everyone who comes over will see it." "Everyone, huh?" "Well, Aunt Jess, and maybe Mrs. Chen if she brings over dumplings, and maybe your friends from work." Emma paused, considering. "Do you have friends from work who come over?" Daniel laughed despite the exhaustion pulling at him. "Not usually, no." "That's sad. You should have more friends." Emma moved to the pantry, pulling out bread and peanut butter with the assurance of someone who knew exactly what she wanted. "Can I make you a sandwich? You look tired." "I am tired, but you don't have to." "I want to." Emma was already pulling out a plate, her movements careful and deliberate. "You always take care of me. Now I get to take care of you." Daniel watched his daughter spread peanut butter with intense concentration, tongue poking out slightly in the way it always did when she focused hard on a task. 7 years old, still so small, but already showing glimpses of the person she'd become. Strong, caring, determined. She handed him the sandwich with a pleased smile. "I made it extra good." "I can tell." Daniel took a bite, the familiar taste of childhood comfort food settling something in his chest. "It's perfect." They ate together at the kitchen table, Emma chattering about school and her best friend Madison and the science project they were planning about butterflies. Normal conversation, normal evening, normal life resuming after abnormal interruption. Daniel's phone buzzed. He'd turned it off during the flight but powered it back on when they landed, and now messages were flooding in. Most he ignored, but one caught his attention, a text from Sarah Chen. "Made it home to San Francisco. My family threw a surprise party. It's overwhelming and wonderful and exhausting. How are you holding up?" Daniel typed back, "Home with my daughter, eating peanut butter sandwiches and hearing about butterfly projects. It's perfect." Sarah's response came quickly. "That sounds like exactly what you need. Thank you again for everything. I couldn't have done it without you." "We did it together," Daniel wrote. "You're an exceptional pilot, Sarah. Don't forget that." He set the phone aside as Emma finished her sandwich and started talking about the homework she'd completed while he was gone, showing him the worksheets with the careful diligence of someone seeking approval. "These are great, Em. You're getting really good at multiplication. Mrs. Patterson says I'm one of the best in the class." Pride glowed in her face. "She also said that being smart runs in families, so I probably get it from you." "Maybe. Or maybe you just work hard and pay attention, which is even better than being naturally smart." Emma considered this. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When you were on the plane, when it was broken and scary, did you think about me?" The question hit with surprising force. Daniel set down the worksheet he'd been examining and gave Emma his full attention. "Every single second," he said honestly. "You were the first thing I thought about when I heard they needed help. And you were what I thought about when we were landing. You're always what I think about, baby." "Were you worried you wouldn't come home?" Daniel took a careful breath. Honesty. Always honesty, but calibrated for a 7-year-old's understanding and emotional capacity. "I was worried," he admitted. "It was a dangerous situation, but I also knew I had training and experience that could help. And I knew that the best way to make sure I came home to you was to do everything I could to help everyone on that plane get home safely. So you were scared, but you did it anyway. Exactly. Emma nodded slowly, processing. When I'm scared at school, like when we have to give presentations, I think about you, about how you do brave things even when you're scared. It helps. Daniel pulled her into a hug, this small person who held his entire heart. You know what helps me be brave? Knowing I have you to come home to. Knowing you're proud of me. That makes everything else easier. They stayed like that for a long moment, father and daughter, the quiet of the apartment wrapping around them. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, but here in this moment, everything was still and perfect and exactly as it should be. Daniel's phone buzzed again, but he ignored it. Whatever messages waited, whatever demands or questions or complications the world wanted to throw at him, they could wait. This moment with Emma was the only thing that mattered. Eventually, Emma pulled back, yawning widely. I'm sleepy. Can we watch a movie before bed? Sure. You pick. She chose an animated film about dragons they'd seen probably 15 times already, curling up against Daniel's side on the couch with her worn, stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Within 20 minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep, her small body completely relaxed in the trust that Daniel would keep her safe. He sat there holding her, watching credits roll on a movie he wasn't really seeing, feeling the weight of everything that had happened finally settling over him. The fear, the decision, the responsibility, the outcome. All of it compressed into 2 days that had somehow changed everything while changing nothing. Emma was still Emma. Home was still home. Life was still life. But Daniel felt different. Not in a way he could easily articulate, not in a way that would make sense to anyone who hadn't sat in that cockpit and held 300 lives in balance, but different nonetheless. He thought about Robert Cassidy on the plane, talking about fear as information, about learning to acknowledge it without being controlled by it. That felt right, felt true. The fear he'd felt in that cockpit wasn't weakness. It was appropriate recognition of stakes and risk. What mattered was what he'd done despite that fear. His phone lit up with another message. This time he glanced at it, an email from his employer's CEO. Daniel, I've been fielding calls from several aviation organizations interested in having you speak about the incident. Also received inquiries from safety boards wanting your input on emergency procedure training. No pressure, but there are opportunities here if you're interested. Let's talk when you're ready. Opportunities. The word felt strange, loaded with implications Daniel wasn't ready to examine. He'd spent 12 years deliberately avoiding the spotlight, building a quiet consulting career that kept him connected to aviation without the intensity and risk of active flying. Now that carefully constructed distance had collapsed in 90 minutes over the Atlantic. People knew his name now, knew his face, knew his story. The question was what he did with that. Daniel carefully extracted himself from Emma and carried her to her bedroom, tucking her into bed with practiced ease. She stirred slightly, mumbling something incoherent, then settled back into sleep. He stood there for a long moment, watching her chest rise and fall with the easy rhythm of childhood. No nightmares, no anxiety, just pure rest. This was what he'd fought for in that cockpit, this moment, this peace, this future. Back in the living room, Daniel picked up his phone and scrolled through the messages he'd been avoiding. Mixed in with the media requests and organizational inquiries were messages from passengers. Thank you notes, expressions of gratitude, invitations to meet in person. One in particular caught his attention, from a woman named Michelle Torres. Mr. Harper, you don't know me, but I was in seat 31D with my teenage son. He has severe anxiety about flying, has for years. We were on that flight because his grandfather is dying in London, and I convinced him the trip was important despite his fear. When everything went wrong, when I thought we were going to crash, I held him and told him to be brave. But I was lying. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. Then I watched you walk to the cockpit, watched the calm determination on your face, and I thought maybe we'd be okay. You gave us hope when hope seemed impossible. My son hasn't stopped talking about it, about how fear and courage can coexist, about how the bravest people are the ones who act despite their terror. He wants to be a pilot now. Can you believe that? After everything, he wants to fly. Thank you for showing him. showing all of us what real courage looks like. Daniel read the message 3 times, feeling something shift in his chest. He'd spent 2 days thinking about what the incident had taken from him: his privacy, his carefully maintained distance from the intensity of aviation, his promise to Emma. But he hadn't really considered what it might have given others: hope, courage. A teenage boy who wanted to fly despite his fear. 318 people who got to keep living their lives, pursuing their dreams, facing their challenges. Maybe that was worth the discomfort of attention, the complexity of broken promises, the weight of unwanted heroism. His phone rang. He almost ignored it, but the caller ID showed Patricia O'Brien. "Mr. Harper, I hope I'm not calling too late." "It's fine. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to give you a preliminary update on the investigation. We've analyzed the flight data recorder and conducted initial examinations of the hydraulic systems. The failure appears to have originated from a fatigue crack in a primary hydraulic line that catastrophically ruptured during the turbulence event. The crack had likely been developing for some time, but the stress of the turbulence caused total failure." Daniel's engineering background immediately grasped the implications. So it was a maintenance issue? Something that should have been caught during inspection? That's what we're investigating. "But Mr. Harper, I'm calling because I wanted you to hear this directly from me. Based on our analysis, if you hadn't been on that aircraft, if you hadn't assisted First Officer Chen with the landing, the outcome would almost certainly have been catastrophic. The combination of total hydraulic failure and crosswind conditions, with only a minimally experienced pilot at the controls." She paused. "The survival rate for those conditions is less than 20%. Your intervention didn't just help, it was likely the difference between everyone walking away and a mass casualty event." The words settled over Daniel like a physical weight. Less than 20%. He'd estimated 60% odds during the landing, but that had been optimistic, apparently. The reality was so much worse. "I thought you should know," O'Brien continued. "Not for any official purpose, but because you deserve to understand the full scope of what you accomplished. What you and First Officer Chen accomplished together. Thank you for telling me. There's one more thing. Several aviation organizations have reached out about potential recognition. The Airline Pilots Association wants to give you their Superior Airmanship Award. The Flight Safety Foundation is interested in having you contribute to their emergency procedure training programs. I know you value your privacy, but these are opportunities to share knowledge that could save lives in future incidents." Daniel thought about Michelle Torres's message, about her son wanting to become a pilot, about all the future pilots who might face similar emergencies and benefit from understanding what worked, what didn't, what made the difference between catastrophe and survival. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I ask. Get some rest, Mr. Harper. You've earned it." After the call ended, Daniel sat in the quiet apartment, processing. Less than 20% survival rate. The numbers kept circling in his mind, stark and unforgiving. He'd saved not just 318 lives, but had defied odds that should have killed them all. The responsibility of that felt impossibly heavy, but so did the opportunity. He pulled up his email and began typing a response to his employer's CEO. "I'm willing to speak to the aviation organizations about the incident, but only if the focus is on systematic improvement and training rather than individual heroism. I want to talk about decision-making under pressure, about crew resource management, about the importance of asking for help when you're in over your head. If they're interested in that conversation, I'm available. If they just want a hero story, they should look elsewhere." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he pulled out a notebook and began writing down everything he could remember about those 90 minutes. Every decision, every thought process, every moment of doubt or clarity. Not for public consumption, not yet, but for himself. A way of processing, of understanding, of transforming raw experience into something that could be examined and learned from. He wrote for 2 hours, filling pages with technical details and emotional observations, with questions about what he could have done differently and acknowledgement of what had gone right. The act of writing helped, gave structure to chaos, turned overwhelming experience into manageable narrative. Finally, exhausted beyond measure, Daniel set the notebook aside and checked on Emma one more time. She'd rolled over in her sleep, dark curls spread across the pillow, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight. The card she'd made him was still on the refrigerator, visible from her bedroom doorway. My daddy the hero. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching his daughter sleep, feeling the full weight of the last 2 days settling into his bones. He'd broken his promise to her. But in breaking it, he'd somehow managed to keep a deeper promise, to be the kind of person she could be proud of, who did the right thing even when it was hard, who helped people when they needed it. Maybe that was what being a father meant. Not keeping every promise perfectly, but honoring the spirit of those promises even when circumstances forced difficult choices. He thought about what he'd tell Emma when she was older, when she could understand the complexity of that night. He'd tell her about fear and courage coexisting, about how the scariest moments often required the bravest actions, about how asking for help was strength, not weakness, about how 318 families got to stay together because people chose to trust each other when it mattered most. And he'd tell her that, through it all, she was what kept him grounded, kept him focused, kept him fighting to bring everyone home safely. Because that was the truth. The promise he'd made to her hadn't been broken. It had been tested and proven stronger than he'd known. He'd promised to come home. And he had. Not in spite of helping those people, but because helping them was the only way to honor what she deserved from him. Daniel finally went to his own bedroom, setting his phone on the nightstand. As he drifted toward sleep, his last conscious thought was of tomorrow. Emma had school. He had calls to return. Life would continue, routine would resume, but everything would be different now. Not worse, not better, just different. And maybe, Daniel thought as sleep finally claimed him, maybe that was exactly how it should be. Morning arrived with Emma jumping on Daniel's bed at 6:30, her energy already at full capacity despite the early hour. She'd laid out his clothes for work. Dress pants she'd selected because they were the fancy ones, and a shirt she insisted matched even though the colors definitely clashed. "You have to look nice today," she announced, standing at the foot of his bed with her hands on her hips in a pose she'd clearly learned from Jessica. "Because you're important now." Daniel sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "I was important before, wasn't I?" "Yes, but now everyone knows it." Emma's logic was unassailable in that particular way only 7-year-olds managed. "Mrs. Patterson said people are going to want to talk to you about what you did, so you should look nice." She wasn't wrong. Daniel's phone showed 6 new voicemail messages and 14 emails, all received since he'd fallen asleep. The world wasn't going to let him slip back into anonymity just because he wanted it. He got Emma ready for school, making her favorite breakfast of chocolate chip pancakes while she chattered about a spelling test she had that afternoon. Normal routine, normal morning, except for the way his phone kept buzzing with incoming messages and the knowledge that everything had fundamentally shifted. The walk to Emma's school was only 4 blocks, a route they'd traveled hundreds of times. But today felt different. People looked at Daniel with recognition, some offering smiles or nods, others whispering to companions as he passed. Word had spread through the neighborhood, apparently. Mrs. Chen from his building had left dumplings outside his door with a note. For the hero, eat, get strong. At the school entrance, Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was waiting, her expression warm but tinged with something else. Expectation, maybe? Or the particular awareness that came from teaching a child whose parent had suddenly become noteworthy. "Mr. Harper, I'm so glad you're back safely," she said, shaking his hand with both of hers. "Emma has been so brave while you were gone, but I know she missed you terribly." "I missed her too." The children have been talking about what happened, of course. I tried to frame it as a learning opportunity about courage and helping others. Mrs. Patterson hesitated. "I hope that was appropriate." "It was perfect. Thank you for taking care of her." Emma hugged him fiercely before running off to join her friends, who immediately surrounded her with questions Daniel couldn't hear but could imagine. He watched her for a moment, animated and confident, clearly enjoying her temporary celebrity status. The walk back to the apartment was quieter, giving Daniel time to steel himself for what came next. He couldn't avoid the world forever. Decisions had to be made about the opportunities O'Brien had mentioned, about how much of his privacy he was willing to sacrifice for the potential good that could come from sharing his experience. His phone rang as he reached his building. The caller ID showed his employer's CEO, Richard Morrison. Daniel, glad I caught you. Have you had a chance to think about the speaking opportunities? Some. I'm willing to do it, but I have conditions. I'm listening. Daniel climbed the stairs to his apartment, organizing his thoughts. First, I only speak if First Officer Chen is included and given equal recognition. This wasn't a solo effort, and I won't participate in anything that suggests otherwise. Second, any compensation goes to aviation safety organizations or scholarship funds for aspiring pilots. I'm not profiting from this. Third, I control the narrative. No dramatization, no exaggeration, just honest discussion about decision-making and emergency procedures. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Those are reasonable conditions. In fact, they make you more valuable, not less. The aviation community respects authenticity. I'll reach out to the organizations and set up preliminary conversations. How does your schedule look for the next few weeks? Daniel thought about Emma's dance recital next Friday, the parent-teacher conferences the week after, the careful routine they'd built. Flexible, but nothing that interferes with my daughter's schedule. She comes first. Understood. I'll be in touch. After ending the call, Daniel stood in his apartment looking at Emma's drawing on the refrigerator. The crayon airplane, the hearts and stars, the careful printing that declared him a hero. He'd spent 2 days resisting that label, pushing back against a narrative that felt too large and too simple. But maybe the label wasn't the problem. Maybe it was his definition of what heroism meant. He'd been thinking of heroes as people without fear, without doubt, without the messy complications of real human experience. But Emma had it right from the beginning. Heroes were people who were scared, but helped anyway. Who made difficult choices and lived with the consequences. Who broke promises when keeping them meant letting others suffer. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. Just got a call from the Flight Safety Foundation. They want both of us for a panel discussion on crew resource management. Are you thinking about doing these things? Daniel typed back, yeah, with conditions. We tell the real story, not the sanitized version. We talk about being terrified and uncertain and making it up as we went along. Sarah's response came quickly. Good, because that's the only story worth telling, the one where we were human and scared and did it anyway. Over the next week, Daniel settled into a new rhythm. Mornings with Emma remained sacred. Breakfast, walk to school, evening homework, and dinner. But the afternoons filled with conference calls and emails, coordinating with aviation organizations, working with Sarah to develop their presentation approach, and slowly coming to terms with the platform they'd been given. The investigation continued its methodical work. O'Brien called regularly with updates, painting a picture of systemic failures and missed inspection opportunities that had led to the hydraulic line rupture. The airline was cooperating fully, implementing new inspection protocols and maintenance procedures. Good would come from the incident, Daniel realized. Changes that might prevent future catastrophes. 8 days after returning home, Daniel received a call that changed everything. Mr. Harper, this is Captain Richard Mitchell. I don't know if you remember me. I was the captain who had the stroke on your flight. Daniel sat down heavily. Captain Mitchell, how are you recovering? Remarkably well, according to my doctors. Minimal lasting effects, mostly just frustration at being grounded for the next 6 months while they monitor my cardiovascular health. Mitchell's voice carried the weight of forced retirement, even if temporary. But I'm calling because I needed to thank you personally. The investigators told me what you did, how you landed my aircraft when every system failed. I've been flying for 38 years, Daniel. I know exactly how impossible that landing should have been. First Officer Chen deserves equal credit. I know, I called her yesterday. Remarkable young woman. She's going to have an outstanding career, but you, Daniel, you walked away from aviation and came back when it mattered most. That takes a different kind of courage. Mitchell paused. I also heard about the conditions you've set for the speaking opportunities, that you're insisting on honesty over heroics. I appreciate that more than you know. It's the only way I can do it. I understand, and I'm calling because I want to be part of it, if you'll have me. I want to talk about what it's like to be the pilot who became incapacitated, who had to trust strangers to save his aircraft and passengers. I think there's value in that perspective. Daniel felt something shift, pieces falling into place. There absolutely is. Yes, I'd like you to be part of this. They talked for another 20 minutes, sketching out ideas for presentations that would cover not just the technical aspects of the emergency, but the human elements, trust, fear, decision-making under pressure, the importance of ego-free communication in crisis situations. When the call ended, Daniel felt energized in a way he hadn't since before the incident. This was how they could honor what happened. Not by turning it into a hero story, but by mining it for lessons that could save lives in the future. 2 weeks after returning home, Daniel stood backstage at an aviation safety conference in Washington, D.C. Sarah Chen beside him, both wearing business attire and microphones, waiting for their cue to walk onto a stage in front of 800 aviation professionals. "You ready?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with nerves. "Not even a little bit," Daniel admitted. "You?" "Terrified. But we're doing this anyway, right?" "Right." They'd spent days preparing, crafting a presentation that was honest and technical and human all at once. Captain Mitchell would join them for the second half, adding his perspective from the right seat. No dramatics, no exaggeration, just 3 people talking about 90 minutes that had tested everything they thought they knew about flying and themselves. The moderator's voice echoed through the auditorium. "Please welcome First Officer Sarah Chen and Daniel Harper." They walked onto the stage together. Daniel acutely aware of the hundreds of faces watching, evaluating, judging. But as the lights settled and he took his position at the podium, something unexpected happened. The fear that had gripped him for 2 weeks eased, replaced by clarity of purpose. These were his people. Pilots, engineers, safety professionals who understood the stakes, who lived the reality of aviation's endless balance between routine and catastrophe. They didn't need a hero story. They needed truth. Sarah spoke first, her voice gaining strength as she described the initial hydraulic failures, the growing realization that they were facing something beyond normal emergency procedures. She didn't minimize her fear or her initial uncertainty. She owned it, made it part of the narrative. Then it was Daniel's turn. He talked about hearing the captain's call for pilots and his visceral desire to stay seated, to honor his promise to Emma. About the flight attendant who'd made him understand the stakes, about walking to the cockpit and seeing the warning lights and knowing they were in serious trouble. "I need to be clear about something," Daniel said, gripping the podium. "I wasn't confident we'd survive. I gave us maybe 60% odds at best, and that was optimistic. The investigation later determined we had less than a 20% survival rate given the conditions. Those aren't good numbers. Those are terrifying numbers." He paused, letting that sink in. But we had a few things working in our favor. First Officer Chen's skill and composure, the aircraft's basic structural integrity, air traffic control's excellent support, and most importantly, we had the willingness to admit we were in over our heads and work together without ego getting in the way. Daniel walked them through the approach, the landing, the heart-stopping moments when it seemed like they might lose control completely. He didn't make it sound easy or inevitable. He made it sound like what it was. A desperate effort that succeeded through a combination of skill, training, and luck. When he finished describing the barrier impact and the aircraft finally stopping, the auditorium was completely silent. Then someone started clapping, and it spread until 800 aviation professionals were on their feet, applause echoing through the space. Daniel felt Sarah's hand find his, squeezing tight. They'd done it, they'd told the truth, and people had heard it. Captain Mitchell joined them for the question and answer session, and the conversation that followed was rich and technical and exactly what Daniel had hoped for. People asked about decision trees, about communication protocols, about the specific flight characteristics of differential thrust control. They asked Mitchell about what he remembered before losing consciousness, about the psychological impact of knowing his medical emergency had put everyone at risk. The questions were respectful, curious, focused on learning rather than sensationalism. Afterward, people lined up to speak with them. Pilots who'd faced their own emergencies. Students who wanted advice. Instructors who wanted to incorporate their experience into training programs. Each conversation reinforced that this was the right choice, that sharing their story could genuinely make aviation safer. An older woman approached near the end, her badge identifying her as a representative from the Flight Safety Foundation. "Mr. Harper, First Officer Chen, Captain Mitchell, that was the most valuable presentation I've heard in my 30 years with this organization. Would you consider developing this into a formal training module? We'd want to work with you to create scenarios, discussion points, simulation parameters. Make this available to flight schools worldwide. Daniel looked at Sarah and Mitchell, seeing his own surprise and pride reflected in their faces. Yes, Sarah said. Absolutely yes. The woman smiled. Excellent. Let's set up a meeting to discuss details. As the conference hall emptied and they finally had a moment to themselves, the three of them stood together, an unlikely team bound by 90 minutes over the Atlantic. Thank you both, Mitchell said quietly, for saving my aircraft, for saving those people, and for doing this, for making something meaningful from what happened. Thank you for trusting us, Sarah replied. I can't imagine how hard it was to lie there knowing the aircraft was in trouble and not being able to do anything. Actually, I don't remember much after the initial chest pain, Mitchell admitted, which is probably a mercy. But knowing now what you accomplished, it gives meaning to what could have been just a tragedy. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Jessica with a photo of Emma at her dance recital rehearsal, mid-leap, face bright with concentration and joy. The message read, "She keeps telling everyone her daddy is speaking at an important conference. So proud of you both." He showed the photo to Sarah and Mitchell. "This is why I almost didn't help," he said. "Why I wanted to stay in my seat and pretend I hadn't heard the call. I'd promised her I wouldn't fly anymore, that I'd stay safe." "But you did help," Sarah said gently, "and you kept the most important promise, to be someone she could be proud of." "Promises to our children are sacred," Mitchell added, "but they're not meant to be straitjackets. They're meant to guide us toward being our best selves. You were your best self that night, Daniel. Emma will understand that when she's older." Daniel looked at the photo again, at his daughter's joyful face, and felt the last piece of guilt finally ease. Mitchell was right. He'd kept the promise that mattered, to be the kind of father Emma deserved, the kind who helped people who needed it, who made hard choices, and lived with integrity. The evening concluded with dinner. Daniel, Sarah, Mitchell, and several other conference attendees who wanted to continue the conversation. Stories were shared, experiences compared, lessons debated over wine, and increasingly philosophical discussions about risk and responsibility in aviation. Sarah told them about her plans to pursue a captain upgrade, emboldened by what she'd discovered about her own capabilities during the emergency. Mitchell talked about what he'd do during his medical leave, including writing a book about his 38 years of flying. And Daniel found himself opening up about the possibility of doing more consulting work specifically focused on emergency training and crew resource management. "You have a gift for this," one of the instructors told Daniel, "for breaking down complex situations and making them accessible. Have you considered teaching?" Daniel hadn't, but the idea took root, growing through the rest of the evening. Teaching would allow him to share what he'd learned without returning to active flying. It would let him contribute to aviation safety while maintaining the stability Emma needed. It was a bridge between the life he'd left behind and the future he was building. He flew home the next morning, energized rather than exhausted by the experience. The hotel had felt less confining this time, the attention less invasive. He was learning to navigate this new reality, finding ways to honor both his privacy and his responsibility to share what he'd learned. Emma was waiting when he arrived home, bursting with questions about the conference. Did he speak in front of lots of people? Was he nervous? Did they like what he said? Daniel answered each question patiently, showing her photos from the event, explaining in 7-year-old terms what he'd talked about. "So you're teaching people how to be brave?" Emma asked. "Not exactly. I'm teaching them how to make good decisions when they're scared, how to work together and ask for help and stay calm when everything seems impossible." "That sounds like being brave to me." Emma's logic, as always, cut straight to the heart of things. Over the following weeks, Daniel's new normal took shape. He continued his consulting work but added teaching seminars and contributing to the Flight Safety Foundation's training development. Sarah called regularly, comparing notes on presentations they were developing and sharing her progress toward captain certification. Mitchell became an unexpected friend, their shared experience creating a bond that transcended the usual professional relationships. The media attention gradually faded as news stories captured public interest, though occasionally someone would recognize Daniel at the grocery store or Emma's school and want to shake his hand or share how the story had affected them. He learned to accept the gratitude gracefully, to recognize that for many people, the incident represented hope and resilience in a world that often felt chaotic and frightening. 3 months after the landing, Daniel received an invitation that stopped him cold. The airline was organizing a reunion for the passengers and crew of Flight 227, offering closure and an opportunity to meet the people who'd helped save them. The event would be held in New York, easily accessible, completely optional. Daniel's first instinct was to decline. He'd moved forward, built something positive from the experience. Looking backward felt dangerous, like it might undo the progress he'd made. But Emma, upon hearing about the invitation, had different thoughts. "You should go, Daddy," she said seriously. "Those people want to say thank you. It would be mean not to let them." "It wouldn't be mean, sweetheart. I'm just not sure I need—" "It's not about what you need." Emma's expression was solemn, older than her years. "It's about what they need. You taught me that helping people is important. This is helping people." Daniel looked at his daughter, at the wisdom she'd somehow developed at 7 years old, and realized she was absolutely right. This wasn't about him anymore. It hadn't been about him for a while. It was about 318 people who'd shared an experience that marked them, who deserved whatever closure or connection they needed. "You're right," he said. "I'll go." The reunion was held at a hotel conference center in Manhattan on a Saturday afternoon. Daniel arrived with Emma and Jessica, his daughter insisting she needed to be there to support him. Sarah flew in from San Francisco, and Mitchell drove up from Virginia. The three of them met in the lobby before the event, a moment of solidarity before facing whatever waited inside. "Ready?" Sarah asked. "Not even a little bit," Daniel admitted, echoing their conversation before the aviation conference. "But we're doing this anyway." They entered the ballroom together. It was packed with people. Passengers Daniel didn't recognize, flight attendants he remembered from that night, and everywhere the buzz of conversation and emotion barely contained. A banner stretched across one wall. Flight 227 reunion, gratitude and healing. The moment someone spotted them, a hush fell over the room. Then, as if choreographed, people began to applaud. Not the polite applause of a conference audience, but something raw and heartfelt and overwhelming. People were crying, smiling, reaching out to touch them as they moved through the room. A man Daniel recognized from the press conference photo, James Patterson, approached with 2 young girls holding his hands. "Mr. Harper, these are my daughters, Sophie and Grace. Girls, this is the man I told you about." The younger girl, maybe 5 years old, looked up at Daniel with wide eyes. "Daddy said you saved us." Daniel knelt down to her level, his throat tight. "Your daddy helped save you by staying calm and helping others stay calm too. Everyone on that plane helped save everyone else." "But you flew the plane," the older girl said. "That's pretty cool." "You know what's cooler? Your dad bringing you here to say hello. That takes courage too." Patterson's eyes were bright with tears. "Thank you for everything, for my daughter's futures, for every birthday and graduation and moment I get to be their father. Thank you." Similar encounters followed, each one chipping away at Daniel's carefully maintained emotional distance. An elderly couple who'd been celebrating their 50th anniversary. A businessman who'd been on his way to his daughter's wedding. A college student heading home for Christmas break. Every person carried a story, a life that had almost ended and instead continued because of what happened that night. Emma stayed close to Daniel's side through it all, her small hand in his, watching quietly as person after person expressed gratitude. At one point, she tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, there are so many people. You saved all these people." "First Officer Chen and I worked together, sweetheart. And Captain Mitchell made good decisions before he got sick, and the flight attendants kept everyone calm. It was teamwork." "But you were the most important part," said a voice behind him. Daniel turned to find Margaret, the senior flight attendant from that night. She looked different in civilian clothes, younger somehow, but her eyes held the same perception that had seen through his reluctance in the hotel room in Shannon. "The most important parts were all the pieces working together," Daniel corrected gently. Margaret smiled, still deflecting credit. "I respect that, but you should know, we've stayed in touch, the cabin crew. We talk about that night sometimes, about how scared we were and how your presence changed everything. You gave us confidence when we had none. That mattered." The airline had arranged for brief speeches from the CEO, from Sarah and Daniel, from passengers who wanted to share their experiences. Daniel listened as person after person talked about how the incident had changed them, made them appreciate life more, strengthened their faith, pushed them to reconcile with estranged family members, or pursue delayed dreams. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he brought Emma with him to the small stage, his daughter's hand firmly gripping his. 3 months ago, I was sitting in seat 8A, trying to sleep, he began. I was exhausted, stressed about work, missing my daughter. I was just another passenger trying to get home. When I heard the call for pilots, every instinct told me to stay seated, to let someone else handle it. I'd made promises about staying out of cockpits, about staying safe for my daughter. He looked down at Emma, who gazed back with complete trust and love. But Emma taught me something important, though she didn't know it at the time. She taught me that promises aren't just about the words we say. They're about the values we hold. I promised to be her father, to be someone she could be proud of. And being that person meant helping when help was needed, even if it meant breaking other promises. Daniel's voice strengthened. I want to thank First Officer Sarah Chen, who showed incredible courage and skill under impossible pressure. Captain Richard Mitchell, who made critical decisions before his medical emergency. The cabin crew who maintained order and dignity throughout. And all of you, every passenger who stayed calm, who helped your neighbors, who trusted us to get you home safely. He paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. But mostly, I want to thank my daughter. Emma, you gave me the courage to stand up when I wanted to stay seated. You gave me the reason to fight for everyone's survival. Because I knew that when I got home, I had to look you in the eye and explain what I'd done. And I wanted to be able to tell you that I'd helped people who needed it, that I'd been brave even though I was scared, that I'd kept the promises that really mattered. Emma reached up and hugged him, her small arms tight around his waist. The room erupted in applause, but Daniel barely heard it. In this moment, holding his daughter, surrounded by people who were alive because of choices made in extreme circumstances, he finally understood what the past 3 months had been about. It wasn't about heroism or recognition or redemption. It was about connection, the fundamental human truth that we're all responsible for each other, that our choices ripple outward in ways we can't always predict, and that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. After the formal speeches, the event dissolved into smaller conversations, people sharing contact information and stories, making plans to stay connected. Daniel found himself talking with a wide range of passengers, each interaction reinforcing how many different lives had intersected in that aircraft, how many stories had almost ended and instead continued. Toward the end of the afternoon, a teenager approached hesitantly. He was tall and gangly, maybe 16, with the uncertain posture of someone still growing into himself. Mr. Harper, I'm Marcus Torres. My mom sent you a message a while back about me wanting to be a pilot. Daniel remembered the message, the mother who'd written about her son's anxiety and newfound courage. Marcus, it's good to meet you. Your mom said you're interested in aviation now? Yeah, I was terrified of flying before. Had panic attacks just thinking about getting on a plane. But after what happened, after watching you and First Officer Chen stay calm when everything was going wrong, he paused, searching for words. I realized fear doesn't have to stop you. It's just information, right? You feel it, and you keep going anyway. That's exactly right, Daniel said, seeing Robert Cassidy's wisdom echoed in this teenager's understanding. Are you pursuing flight training? I'm taking ground school classes. My mom's worried I'm just reacting to trauma, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like I found something that matters. Marcus's eyes were bright with passion. I want to be like you and First Officer Chen. I want to be the person who can help when things go wrong. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a sense of legacy and responsibility he hadn't fully grasped until this moment. Then let me give you some advice. Learn everything you can. Stay humble. Remember that the best pilots are the ones who never stop being students, who admit when they don't know something, who ask for help when they need it. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Good. Daniel pulled out his phone. Give me your email. I know some excellent flight instructors, and I'm involved with a scholarship program for aspiring pilots. Let me connect you with resources. Marcus's face lit up with joy and disbelief. Really? You do that? Of course. You're exactly the kind of pilot aviation needs. Someone who understands fear but doesn't let it control you. Someone who wants to help people. That's what this is all about. As Marcus walked away, clutching Daniel's contact information like a treasure, Sarah appeared at his elbow. "You just changed that kid's life," she said quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe he would have found his way regardless." Daniel watched Marcus rejoin his mother, saw the hug they shared, the excitement in the teenager's gestures as he explained what had happened. "But if I can help, why wouldn't I? Because you didn't sign up for this. You didn't ask to be a role model or a mentor or a symbol." "No," Daniel agreed. "I just asked to get home safely to my daughter. Everything else is—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. "Consequence?" Sarah suggested. "Responsibility? Opportunity?" "All of those, and somehow okay with all of it." Daniel looked around the ballroom at the hundreds of people connecting, healing, moving forward. 3 months ago, I would have given anything to undo that night, to make it so I'd never heard that call for pilots. But now you understand why it mattered, Sarah finished, not just because everyone survived, but because of what it taught us. About ourselves, about each other, about what we're capable of when we have to be. Emma appeared, tugging on Daniel's sleeve again. "Daddy, can we go home soon? I'm tired." Daniel checked his watch. They'd been here for 3 hours, and Emma had been patient beyond her years. "Yeah, sweetheart, we can go home." As they prepared to leave, Captain Mitchell approached one last time. "Daniel, Sarah, I have something I want to give you both." He pulled out 2 small boxes, offering one to each of them. "Open them." Inside were wings, captain's wings, the kind pilots wore on their uniforms, but these were different. Engraved on the back of each set were the words, "Flight 227, February 14th, 2025. Courage, skill, teamwork." "I had them made," Mitchell said, his voice thick with emotion. "I wanted you to have something tangible to remember what you accomplished, what we all accomplished together." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Daniel's throat closed completely. The simple gift carried more weight than any formal recognition or award could have. "Thank you," Sarah managed. "Thank you," Daniel echoed, gripping Mitchell's hand, "for trusting us, for being part of this." The drive home was quiet, Emma dozing in the back seat, Jessica driving while Daniel stared out the window at the city passing by. He held the small box with the wings, feeling the weight of what they represented. 3 months ago, he'd been a man trying to maintain distance from his past, to build a safe and stable life for his daughter. Now he was something different, not better or worse, just different. Connected to people and experiences in ways he couldn't have imagined, carrying responsibilities he hadn't chosen but had learned to embrace. "You okay?" Jessica asked quietly, glancing at him. "Yeah," Daniel said, and realized he meant it. "I really am." That night, after Emma was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with the captain's wings in front of him. He thought about promises kept and broken, about the complex calculus of doing right by the people who depended on you while also answering calls you didn't expect. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Thank you for today, for everything. I couldn't have survived that night without you, and I couldn't have built what came after without your support. You're a good man, Daniel Harper. Emma's lucky to have you as her father." Daniel typed back, "We survived it together. We built this together. Thank you for being the kind of pilot who makes me believe aviation's future is in good hands." He set the phone aside and walked to Emma's room, standing in her doorway like he had so many times over the past 3 months. She slept peacefully, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight, dark curls spread across her pillow. The card she'd made him was still on the refrigerator, a testament to her absolute faith in him. Tomorrow, he'd wake up and make her chocolate chip pancakes. He'd walk her to school and kiss her goodbye. He'd go to work and continue building a life that honored both who he'd been and who he was becoming. He'd answer emails from aviation organizations and aspiring pilots like Marcus. He'd continue developing training materials with Sarah and Mitchell. He'd live the life he'd fought so hard to preserve in that cockpit. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, Daniel let himself fully feel what the past 3 months had taught him. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action despite it. That promises were meant to guide toward goodness, not bind toward inaction. That breaking one promise to honor a deeper truth wasn't failure, but wisdom. That 318 lives saved meant 318 futures preserved, families kept whole, dreams allowed to continue. And most importantly, that being a father to Emma meant showing her through actions what values really meant, helping others, facing fear, making hard choices, and living with integrity even when it cost him the comfortable anonymity he'd built. He'd kept his promise to Sarah, his wife, in the ways that mattered. He'd promised to be there for Emma, and he was, not just physically present, but emotionally whole, someone she could genuinely be proud of. The sleeping passenger in seat 8A had woken up to save 300 lives, but in doing so, he'd also saved himself, from a half-lived existence, from promises that had become prisons, from the fear of being more than he believed himself capable of becoming. Daniel returned to his bedroom and placed the captain's wings on his nightstand where he'd see them each morning. They would remind him of what one night had taught him, of the people he'd helped, of the connections he'd forged, of the legacy he was building, not through seeking recognition, but through choosing, moment by moment, to be someone his daughter could look up to. He fell asleep peacefully for the first time since that night over the Atlantic, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new chances to honor the promises that really mattered. And when Emma woke him at 6:30 with her boundless morning energy, when she showed him the new picture she'd drawn at school of an airplane flying through clouds with a rainbow arcing across the sky, when she told him about the report she had to write about her hero. And could she please write about him? Daniel smiled and said yes. Because that's what heroes did. They showed up. They helped. They admitted fear while acting anyway. They kept the promises that mattered most. And they came home to the people who loved them, carrying both their scars and their wisdom, ready to face whatever came next with courage, born not from certainty, but from love. Daniel Harper had promised his daughter he'd come home. And he had. Not just from that flight, but from the distant place he'd been hiding in for 12 years. He was home now, fully present, fully alive, fully himself. And that was the promise that mattered most of all.